The rain slashed against the synthetic polymer of the planetary dome, a rhythmic drumming that usually vanished into the white noise of the Sector 7 sprawl. But tonight, to Cade, it sounded like static interference in a broken headset, a sound he associated with bad comms and worse situations. He sat on the edge of a mattress that had seen better decades, his elbows resting on his knees and his head in his hands. The neon glow from the billboard outside, advertising the latest cyber enhancements from GenCore, bled through the blinds, painting stripes of sickly pink and electric blue across the cramped apartment. In the crib beside the bed, Luna began to stir. It started as a low whimper, the kind of sound that instantly spiked Cade's cortisol levels. He was moving before he was fully awake, his body remembering the drill even when his mind was still snagged on a nightmare of burning skies and the smell of ozone. He reached into the crib, his large, calloused hand hovering over the infant for a second before gently settling on her chest. She was warm. Too warm. "Shh, little moon," Cade whispered, his voice a gravelly rumble that had not smoothed out since he left the service 3 years ago. "It is okay. I am here." Luna did not agree. Her whimper escalated into a thin, reedy cry that sawed at Cade's nerves. He lifted her, feeling the impossible fragility of her ribcage against his forearm. She was 8 months old but felt lighter, as if the gravity of the megacity was trying to reject her. He carried her into the kitchenette, a narrow strip of space dominated by a recycling unit and a nutrient dispenser that had been broken for 6 weeks. The digital clock on the microwave flashed 3 in the morning. Cade shifted Luna to his shoulder, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet, a rhythmic motion that used to calm her. Tonight, she was rigid, arching her back, her small fists clenching and unclenching against his tattered gray t-shirt. He knew what it was. It was the hunger. Cade opened the cabinet above the sink. It was a muscle memory he had performed 1,000 times, but this time, his stomach dropped. The canister of formula, the silver tin with the red medical cross stamped on the side, was light. He shook it. The sound was not the heavy shift of powder, but the dry hiss of dust hitting the metal walls. "Just one more bottle," Cade muttered to himself, the lie tasting like copper in his mouth. "Just have to make it stretch until the depot opens at 6. He set Luna in her high chair, where she continued to wail, her face turning a blotchy, frantic red. Cade's hands shook slightly as he scooped the white powder into the bottle. It was a specialized blend, a peptide hydrolysate formula engineered for infants with severe metabolic rejection issues. Standard ration milk made her vomit until she was dehydrated. This stuff was the only thing her system tolerated, and lately, it had been harder to find than a clean patch of sky. He added water from the purifier, shaking the bottle vigorously. The liquid looked thin, watery. He held it up to the neon light filtering in from the street. It was barely opaque. "It will be enough," he told her, though he was speaking to the ghost of his own anxiety. "Here. Drink up." Luna took the bottle, her cries silenced by the nipple, but her eyes remained wide, fixed on him. They were dark, intelligent eyes, too perceptive for a baby, sometimes swirling with flecks of color that did not match Cade's brown or her mother's green. Cade pushed the thought away. He pushed away the memory of the hospital, the sterile room where his wife had died of a sudden, unexplained hemorrhage hours after the birth. The doctors whispering about genetic incompatibility and unknown variables. He was a soldier. He dealt in logistics, in supply lines, in securing the objective. The objective was keeping Luna alive. By 5 in the morning, the bottle was empty, but Luna was not asleep. She was fussing again, a low-energy whine that terrified Cade more than the screaming. He strapped her into the carrier against his chest, zipped his heavy field jacket over her to shield her from the recycled air of the corridors, and headed out. The apartment building, Block 490, was a vertical slum rising 200 stories into the smog. The elevator was out of order. Again. So Cade took the stairs, descending 40 flights of concrete stairs that smelled of stale urine and chemical cleaner. He kept one hand on the railing and one hand over Luna's head, his eyes scanning the landings from habit. The Dome government called this peace, but Cade knew a war zone when he walked through one. The war had just changed shape. It was not thermal detonators and orbital strikes anymore. It was starvation algorithms and surveillance drones. He stepped out onto the street level. The city was a canyon of steel and glass, the upper levels lost in the toxic fog that trapped the neon light, creating a perpetual twilight. Drones buzzed overhead, black beetle shapes with red optical sensors, scanning the faces of the early shift workers trudging toward the transit lines. Cade pulled his collar up. He had the profile of a man who wanted to be invisible. He walked with a slight limp, a souvenir from the Dragon Frontier Wars on the Outer Rim colonies, where he had spent 10 years hunting insurgents in jungles that tried to eat him. Now, the enemy was the Supply Distribution Authority. The ration depot was 3 blocks away, a concrete bunker wedge between a noodle bar and a cyber pawn shop. Even at this hour, the line wrapped around the corner. Cade joined the queue, shifting his weight to spare his bad knee. The people around him were gray-faced, coughing into their sleeves, clutching their ID chips like talismans. A holographic projection above the depot entrance cycled through the morning announcements from the Central Governance Council. Citizenship is contribution, the pleasant synthesized female voice intoned. Resource management ensures survival for the collective. Report unauthorized biological matter to your local Gen Corps representative immediately. Safety is vigilance. Cade tuned it out. He focused on Luna's breathing against his chest. It was shallow. It took 2 hours to reach the front. The sun had risen somewhere outside the dome, turning the smog from black to a bruised purple. When Cade finally stepped up to the plexiglass window, he was sweating under his jacket, his patience frayed to a single tension wire strand. Name and ID, the clerk said without looking up. He was a young man, pale and bored, wearing the crisp blue uniform of the civil service. Cade placed his wrist on the scanner. The chip embedded in his skin chirped, Cade Walker, Veteran Class 4, Dependent, Luna Walker, Authorization verified. The clerk droned, tapping at his interface. Ration request, formula, type 7 beta, metabolic support. The clerk paused. His fingers hovered over the holographic keyboard. He squinted, then tapped a few more times. A low buzzer sounded, a harsh, rejecting noise that made Cade's stomach turn over. The clerk sighed, denied. Cade blinked, sure he had misheard. Excuse me? Denied, the clerk repeated louder this time, finally looking up with eyes deadened by 1,000 similar conversations. Type 7 beta has been moved to restricted status as of midnight. Restricted? Cade's voice rose, cracking the carefully maintained veneer of calm. That is baby formula. It is for a child with a medical condition. She cannot digest the standard slop. The clerk shrugged, a gesture of infinite indifference. New protocols. The algorithm flagged a shortage in the synthesis components. Priority goes to citizens class 2 and above, or those with a medical exemption signed by a Gen Corps specialist. I have a medical file, Cade snapped, slamming his hand against the partition. The plexiglass vibrated. Look at the screen and she has a prescription. The clerk looked at the screen again, but his expression did not soften. It shifted to something else. mild distaste. I see the file, Mr. Walker, but I also see a biological risk flag attached to the infant's ID. A what? Biological risk usually means genetic anomalies. The system locks out premium resources for high-risk dependents to prevent waste. Waste? Cade leaned in, his face inches from the glass. The old anger, the cold combat rage he thought he had buried in the mud of the frontier, flared hot and bright in his chest. You are calling my daughter waste? She is starving. She needs that formula to live. Look, move along, the clerk said, his hand drifting toward the panic button under the desk. You are holding up the line. If you want to dispute the flag, go to the Civic Health Bureau. They open in 3 hours. I do not have 3 hours, Cade shouted. Luna, startled by the noise, began to scream against his chest. The sound was thin and terrified. Security, the clerk barked into his headset. 2 drones detached from the ceiling mount, dropping with a menacing hum. Their optical sensors turned from passive green to warning yellow, locking onto Cade's face. Citizen Walker, a mechanical voice rasped from the drones. Desist aggressive behavior. Step away from the distribution point. This is your first warning. Cade stared at the drones. He knew exactly where to hit them to disable their gyros. He could take them both down in 4 seconds. He could smash the glass, grab the clerk by his collar and force him to override the system. And then he would be arrested or shot, and Luna would be alone. The rage curdled into a heavy, sickening lump of helplessness. Cade stepped back, his hands raised in surrender. Fine, he choked out. I am leaving. He turned and walked away, the cries of his daughter echoing in his ears, louder than the murmurs of the people in line who watched him go with pity or relief that it wasn't them. He walked back into the neon fog, empty-handed. The walk back to Block 490 was a blur. Cade stopped at 3 bodegas and a black market stall in an alleyway. None of them had Type 7 beta. The black market vendor, a Rhodian with a cybernetic eye, had laughed at him. That stuff is gold dust, soldier. GenCore locked it down tight. Ask yourself why. Cade didn't want to ask why. He just wanted to stop Luna's crying. By the time he reached his floor, the 7th level of the high-rise, his legs felt like lead. The hallway was flickering, the overhead fluorescent strips dying a slow, buzzing death. The air here was humid, smelling of boiled cabbage and old circuitry. He trudged down the corridor, counting the doors, 7A, 7B, 7C. Then he reached 7D. Cade slowed down. He always did when he passed this door. It was different from the others. While the rest of the hallway was scarred with gang tags and grime, the door to 7D was painted a deep, lustrous matte black. Painted over the metal were swirling sigils in a paint that seemed to catch the light even in the dim hallway. Curves and sharp angles that looked like wings, or perhaps claws. But it was the heat that made him pause. A faint, dry warmth radiated from the metal frame, rippling the air like a mirage on hot asphalt. The neighbors whispered about the woman who lived there. Old Mrs. Chu in 7F had grabbed Cade's arm once, her eyes wide. The dragon woman, she had hissed. Do not look her in the eye. She has the blood of the old monsters. Cade had dismissed it as superstition. The city was full of gene mods and cosmetic slicers. People gave themselves tails, gills, glowing skin. A woman playing at being a dragon was hardly the weirdest thing in Sector 7. He had never seen her, only heard the heavy rhythmic thud of the door closing late at night, or caught the scent of something spicy and sulfurous, like burning cinnamon, drifting from her vents. He hurried past the shimmering door, clutching Luna tighter. He did not have time for urban legends. Inside his apartment, the silence was worse than the noise outside. He placed Luna in the crib. She had stopped crying, exhausted, her small face pale and pinched. She looked at him with a trust that broke his heart. "I am sorry," he whispered, leaning his forehead against the crib railing. "I am so sorry." "Luna." He went to the kitchen. He took the empty tin of formula and filled it with water, swishing it around to catch the microscopic dust of powder clinging to the sides. He poured the cloudy water into a bottle. It was practically transparent. It had almost no nutritional value. It would fill her stomach, stop the pangs for an hour, maybe 2. And then what? He looked at his hands. They were scarred, strong hands. Hands that could dismantle a plasma rifle in the dark. Hands that had built shelters in monsoon rains. But they could not conjure food from thin air. He was failing. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He was a protector who could not protect. "I am just a lone veteran who can't even get milk for his baby," he muttered to the empty room, his voice cracking. The despair was a rising tide, choking him. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white, fighting the urge to punch the metal surface. Luna began to wind up again, a low, miserable keening sound. Then, the hallway sensors buzzed. It was a sharp, intrusive sound. Cade froze. He wasn't expecting anyone. He didn't have friends in the building, and the landlord only came by on the 1st of the month to collect credits. He waited. Maybe it was a glitch. Thud, thud, thud. A slow, deliberate knock. It was not the mechanical rap of a drone or the impatient pounding of a debt collector. It sounded heavy, confident. Cade wiped his face with his sleeve, checking the pistol he kept taped under the kitchen table. He didn't draw it, but he loosened the tape. He picked up Luna, kneading her close, and walked to the door. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice rough. "Open up, neighbor," a voice replied. It was a woman's voice, low, smoky, vibrating with a strange resonance that seemed to hum in the floorboards. Cade hesitated, then unlocked the magnetic seal. The door slid open with a hiss. For a moment, Cade forgot to breathe. He'd forgot. Standing in the corridor was the striking woman he had heard rumors about. She was tall, nearly his height, wearing a long trench coat made of some dark, matte material that seemed to absorb the hallway's flickering light. Underneath, she wore tactical gear that hugged a lithe, powerful frame. But it was her face that held him. She was terrifyingly beautiful, with high, sharp cheekbones and skin the color of polished bronze. Her hair was a cascade of dark waves, pinned back to reveal her temples. There, embedded in the skin, were scales, shimmering, iridescent golden scales that clustered around her hairline and faded down her neck. Her eyes were the most arresting feature. They were vertical slits, burning with a luminous amber light that seemed to pierce right through Cade's defenses. She stood with an easy, confident stance, one hand resting on her hip, the other holding a small, metallic case. She didn't look like a resident of a slum block. She looked like royalty in exile, or perhaps a predator pausing before a meal. In that frozen second, the irony of the universe crystallized in Cade's mind. A thought, precise and absurd, ran through his head. A lone veteran needed milk for his baby. Then the dragon woman next door knocked with an offer. "Can I help you?" Cade asked, his defensive posture automatic. He shifted Luna slightly away from the stranger. The woman's gaze dropped to the baby. Her expression softened, the amber fire in her eyes dimming to a warm glow. "I heard her crying," the woman said. "The sound carries. I am handling it," Cade said, starting to close the door. "She is hungry, Cade," the woman said. "She used his name. He hadn't given it to her, and she needs something you cannot get at the depot." Not anymore. Cade stopped, the door half shut. He looked at her, really looked at her. How do you know my name? And how do you know what she needs? Lyra, she said, ignoring his first question. My name is Lyra, and I know because I have been listening to that specific cry for 3 nights. I know the sound of a metabolism burning itself out. She lifted the metal case slightly. I have what she needs. Cade narrowed his eyes. Is that right? And what are you selling? I don't have credits for black market stims. I am not selling stims, Lyra said calmly. I have access to a supply of Dragonline nutrient serum, high-density proteins, trace elements, biocompatible enzymes. It is off-market, but it matches her genetic markers better than that processed chalk GenCore sells. Dragonline. The word hung in the air. Cade knew what it meant. It meant illegal. It meant alien. It meant the kind of contraband that got you disappeared to a black site if a drone sniffed it on you. And why would you offer this to me? Cade asked, his voice low. We have never spoken. Lyra took a step closer. The heat radiating from her was palpable now. A pleasant warmth that pushed back the damp chill of the hallway. Because neighbors help neighbors, she said, though there was a wry twist to her lips that suggested she didn't believe in such platitudes. And because I can keep her supplied, I can make sure she doesn't starve. Cade looked at the case, then down at Luna. The baby was chewing on her fist. Her eyes squeezed shut in discomfort. He felt the weight of his failure pressing down on him. He had no other options. The depot was closed to him. The black market was dry. He let out a long, ragged breath. I am making deals with mythical neighbors now, he muttered, stepping back. That is where I am at. Lyra's lips quirked into a ghost of a smile. Myths have their uses. Soldier. She stepped inside. The atmosphere in the apartment changed instantly. Her presence seemed to fill the cramped space, making the walls feel even closer. The air grew warmer, smelling faintly of that spicy, sulfurous scent, like ozone and cinnamon. She placed the case on the wobbly kitchen table and clicked the latches open. Inside, nestled in shock-absorbent foam, were 6 vials of a shimmering, viscous blue liquid. It glowed with its own internal light. Do you have a clean bottle? Lyra asked, shedding her trench coat to reveal arms that were toned and marked with faint, pale scars. Cade handed her the bottle with the watery mixture he had prepared. She poured it into the sink without asking, then cracked open one of the blue vials. 1 part serum, 3 parts water, she instructed, her movements precise and graceful. Do not shake it. Swirl it gently. The proteins are volatile. Cade watched her, fascinated despite himself. She moved with an economy of motion that reminded him of the elite commandos he had worked with, or the Draken warriors he had fought. She handed the bottle back to him. Feed her. Cade took it. The bottle felt warm, vibrating slightly in his hand. He sat down and brought the nipple to Luna's lips. She drank greedily. Cade held his breath, waiting for the rejection, waiting for the gagging, the vomiting. But it didn't come. Luna sucked down the blue liquid, her tiny hands grabbing the bottle. Her eyes fluttered open, and the frantic tension in her body dissolved. Her skin, usually pale and clammy, seemed to gain a touch of color. She finished half the bottle and sighed, a sound of pure contentment, before her eyelids drooped. Cade slumped in the chair, the adrenaline draining out of him, leaving him hollowed out. He felt a stinging behind his eyes and blinked rapidly. It was just relief, he told himself. Just exhaustion. He looked up to find Lyra watching him. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed. Her expression was unreadable. but her eyes were tracking the tears he was fighting back. There was something there. Not pity, exactly, but a recognition of pain, a curiosity. She works fast, Cade said, his voice thick. The stuff works fast. It is potent, Lyra said softly. She reached out, her fingers brushing the back of his hand as she took the half-empty bottle to set it on the table. The contact was electric. Cade flinched, not from pain, but from the sudden jolt of static and heat that jumped between them. It wasn't just temperature. It was a sensation of connection, momentary and sharp. He looked up, startled. Lyra pulled her hand back, her eyes widening slightly. A flush of gold appeared on her cheekbones, her scales shimmering as if reacting to an unseen current. "Sorry," she murmured, clearing her throat. Static. "The air recyclers are dry." "Yeah," Cade said, rubbing his hand. "Static." He looked at the sleeping baby, then back at the woman who had just saved her life. He knew nothing came free in this city, especially not from a woman who radiated danger like a fusion reactor. "How much?" Cade asked, gesturing to the case. "I don't have many credits, but I can." "I don't want your credits." "Cade," Lyra interrupted, "credits are easy to steal." "Then what?" Lyra straightened up, the softness vanishing from her posture. She was the operative now, the predator negotiating terms. "I will keep the vials coming," she said. "Enough to keep Luna healthy and growing. But this is not charity. It is an investment. In what? In you." She locked eyes with him. "Someday soon, maybe next week, maybe next month, I am going to knock on your door again. And I am going to ask you for a favor." "What kind of favor?" Cade asked, his guard going back up. "I am not a hitman. I am done with killing." Lyra's smile was sharp, showing teeth that looked slightly too white, slightly too perfect. "I won't ask you to kill anyone who doesn't deserve it, but it will be dangerous. And when I ask, you cannot say no. No questions. No refusal." Cade looked at the blue vials. He looked at Luna, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. He thought about the clerk at the depot, the drones, the hopelessness of the rainy street. "As long as it doesn't endanger her," Cade said, nodding toward the crib. "That is my line." Lyra nodded solemnly. "That is acceptable. The child is off limits. The deal is between you and me." She extended her hand. "Do we have an accord, neighbor?" Cade hesitated for one last second. He knew he was signing a contract with the devil, or something older than the devil. But he reached out and took her hand. Her grip was strong, her skin fever-hot and dry. "Deal," he said. Lyra released him and pulled her trench coat back on. "I will leave the case. Hide it. If Gencor finds it, they will not just confiscate it. They will take you apart to find where you got it." She moved to the door, checking the display panel before unlocking it. "Lyra," Cade called out. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Thank you." She didn't smile this time. She just gave a single curt nod. "Keep your head down." "Cade." She slipped out into the corridor. Cade walked to the doorway and watched her go. The emergency lights in the hall had switched to their night cycle red, bathing the concrete in the color of blood. Lyra walked away from him, her silhouette long and sharp against the flickering shadows. As she passed under a sputtering neon tube, the light caught the back of her neck, and for a fleeting second, Cade saw the dragon scale patterns ripple and flare, catching glints of neon like living armor. She turned the corner and was gone. Cade closed the door and locked it. He engaged the deadbolt. He engaged the manual chain. He went back to the kitchen table and sat down next to the glowing blue vials. He reached out and gently rocked the crib where Luna slept, her chest rising and falling in a deep, steady rhythm. He was not alone anymore. He had help, but as the heat from Lyra's visit slowly faded from the room, Cade stared at the swirling dragon sigils he knew were painted on the other side of the wall, and wondered what exactly he had just invited into their lives. The rhythm of survival in Block 490 settled into a strange, uneasy cadence over the next 10 days. It was measured in the slow drip of the hallway condenser, the flicker of the failing neon tube outside apartment 7D, and the silent, precise handoffs that happened between Cade and the woman who lived behind the dragon-painted door. Lyra never knocked when Cade was asleep. She never knocked when he was busy. It was as if she had a tap into the apartment's audio sensors, or perhaps something more visceral, an instinct that told her exactly when the last drop of the blue serum had vanished down Luna's throat. Cade would be standing in the kitchenette, rinsing the bottle, the anxiety beginning to tighten his chest as he looked at the empty glass vial. And then he would hear it, the heavy, deliberate thud of a boot against the floor in the corridor. A pause, the subtle click of a mag lock disengaging. He would open the door, and she would be there. Sometimes she was leaning against the peeling wallpaper, looking like a bored sentinel, spinning a new vial between her fingers. Other times she looked exhausted, her trench coat smeared with engine grease or something darker that Cade chose not to identify, her golden eyes dim and heavy. But she always had the serum. "You are running low," she would say. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Cade would take the vial, the glass warm from her body heat. "I was just about to panic. Thanks." "Panic is bad for digestion," she would drawl, her voice a low hum that seemed to vibrate in Cade's sternum. "Keep the baby calm, soldier. It keeps the ghosts away." The hallway became their demilitarized zone. It was a liminal space, neither his territory nor hers, a strip of concrete and shadows where they circled each other with a mix of wariness and fascination. Cade found himself lingering in the doorway longer than necessary, inventing reasons to check the mail slot or inspect the jam, just to see if the door to 7D would open. There were moments of unexpected levity that cracked the grim veneer of their lives. One Tuesday, the building's main cargo lift jammed between the 6th and 7th floors. Cade, carrying a strap bag of dirty laundry and a fussy Luna, found Lyra standing before the pry bar rack, kicking the metal doors with a rhythmic, calculated violence. "Technique needs work," Cade commented, shifting Luna to his other hip. "You are just denting the finish." Lyra stopped, brushing a stray lock of dark hair from her face. The golden scales at her temple flashed under the emergency strobes. "Oh? And I suppose you have a better method for motivating a 50-year-old hydraulic system?" Cade handed her the baby, a move that surprised him as soon as he did it. Lyra took Luna instinctively, her movements fluid and secure. Cade stepped up to the control panel, pulled a multi-tool from his belt, and shorted 2 wires in the access port. The doors groaned and slid open. "Percussive maintenance is for amateurs," Cade said, wiping grease from his thumb. Lyra looked at the open doors, then down at Luna, who was staring up at her with wide, fascinated eyes. "Show off," she muttered, but there was a smirk playing on her lips. She handed Luna back, and for a second, their fingers tangled in the fabric of the baby's blanket. The heat was there again, that static charge that made the hair on Cade's arms stand up. Another night, Lyra caught him trying to assemble a second-hand sensory mobile he had scavenged from a junk shop. He was sitting on the hallway floor, surrounded by plastic stars and tangled fiber optic wires, cursing softly. That looks complicated, Lyra said, leaning over him. Her shadow fell across his hands. It is supposed to simulate a nebula, Cade grumbled, jamming a connector into the wrong port. I think it simulates a headache. Lyra crouched down. Her scent, that mix of ozone, cinnamon, and something wilder, filled his headspace. Give it here. You are trying to force the coupling. You have to be gentle. She took the wires, her fingers, tipped with nails that looked slightly too sharp to be manicured, moved with impossible dexterity. Within seconds, the mobile lit up, spinning a soft projection of blue and violet stars against the grimy ceiling. You handled heavy ordnance in the war, didn't you? She asked, looking sideways at him. Demolitions, Cade admitted. Figures, Lyra teased, the amber light of her eyes dancing. You treat everything like it has a blast radius, even plastic stars. Cade laughed, a rusty sound he hadn't heard from himself in a long time. Maybe I just like things that go boom. The humor was a shield, but the tension beneath it was thickening. It wasn't just gratitude for the milk. Cade found his eyes tracking her movement when she walked away, the predatory grace of her stride, the way her coat swirled around her ankles. He caught himself wondering what the scales on her temples felt like, if they were hard like armor or soft like skin. But alongside the attraction, the suspicion grew. It started with Luna. The baby was thriving on the Dragonline serum. She had gained weight, her cheeks filling out, her grip strength surprising for an infant. But there were other changes. Cade noticed that Luna's bathwater stayed warm longer than it should have, as if her small body was acting as a thermal coil. One evening, while feeding her, the overhead light hit Luna's eyes at a sharp angle. For a fleeting second, her pupils didn't look round. They looked elliptical, vertical, like Lyra's. Cade had blinked, and the image was gone, replaced by the normal dark eyes of his daughter. But the memory of it sat in his gut like a swallowed stone. And then there was the way Luna reacted to Lyra, whenever the neighbor held her. Luna didn't just calm down. She seemed to synchronize. Her breathing would match Lyra's slow, deep rhythm. She would reach out with tiny hands to touch the scales on Lyra's face, cooing a sound that was less like a baby's babble and more like a low, vibrating purr. It came to a head on a rainy Thursday. Cade had invited Lyra in, ostensibly to pay her for the latest batch, though she always refused the credits. They were standing in the kitchen, drinking instant coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. What is she? Cade asked abruptly. He didn't look at Lyra. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. Lyra paused, her mug halfway to her lips. She is a baby. Cade, you know what I mean. The formula, the eyes, the way she looks at you. Cade turned to face her. Why does she need dragon blood to survive? Lyra set the mug down. The playful neighbor persona evaporated. Her face went still, her expression shifting into something ancient and guarded. She has potential, Lyra said carefully. Genetic potential. Potential for what? To be more than just another cog in the Gen Core machine? Lyra sighed, looking down at her hands. She flexed her fingers, and Cade saw the skin ripple, the underlying structure of her hand shifting slightly. I am not fully human. Cade, she said softly. You figured that out, I guessed, Cade said. The scales gave it away. I am Draken, she corrected. Well, half. My mother was human. My father was not. We are an old bloodline. Gen Core and the Council used to call us Apex assets during the expansion wars. We were their shock troops, their elite weapons. Cade felt a chill. He knew about the Apex units. Every soldier in the frontier wars knew about them. They were the monsters the government dropped when the orbital bombardments didn't work. And now? Cade asked. Now we are liabilities. Lyra's lip curled. The war ended. Peace requires order. And we are chaotic variables. They hunted us down, branded us threats. Most of us are dead or in deep containment. The rest of us live in the shadows, smuggling tech and trying not to get erased. She looked up at him, her gaze challenging. That is what you are letting into your house, veteran. A chaotic variable. Cade held her gaze. He had his own ghosts. I fought in the Outer Rim, Cade said, his voice flat. The Dragon Frontier. Lyra went very still. I know. I saw the unit patch on your old jacket, the one you keep in the back of the closet. Then you know what my unit did, Cade said. We hunted insurgents. We were told they were terrorists burning colonies. Were they? Lyra asked. Her voice was ice cold now. Or were they families trying to hold on to their land? I followed orders, Cade said, the defense automatic, drilled into him by a decade of briefings. We tried to protect civilians. I tried. Lyra laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You tried. That is comforting. I am sure it was a great comfort to the villages that burned. The air in the kitchen grew heavy, suffocating. The unspoken guilt of a war neither of them had started but both had survived hung between them. Cade wanted to explain that he had been young, that he had been lied to, that he woke up screaming 3 nights a week. But he saw the hardness in Lyra's eyes, the defensive shielding of a survivor. I didn't know, Cade whispered, about the families. Not until the end. Lyra looked at him for a long time. The anger in her eyes didn't vanish, but it receded, buried under layers of pragmatism. It doesn't matter now, she said, breaking the gaze. The past is ash. We are just 2 people trying to keep a baby alive in the wreckage. She finished her coffee in one swallow and moved to the door. I have to go. I have business tonight. Cade watched her leave, feeling like he had just walked through a minefield blindfolded. The knock came 2 nights later. It was different this time. Urgent. 3 rapid raps, a pause, then one more. Cade opened the door. Lyra was dressed for war. She wore a tactical vest over a dark bodysuit, heavy combat boots, and a coat lined with something that looked like ballistic weave. Her hair was tied back tight, exposing the scales that now seemed to be glowing with a faint, agitated heat. It is time, she said. Cade blinked, sleep still clinging to him. Time for what? The favor, she said. Get dressed. Cade looked at the clock. It was midnight. Lyra, I can't just leave Luna. You have a neighbor, right? Mrs. Chu? She owes you for fixing her heater. Wake her up. Tell her it is an emergency. Cade hesitated. This was moving too fast. What is the job? Escort, Lyra said. I have a meeting in the lower levels, Sector 12. I am trading some recovered Gen Core data chips and a crate of raw biotic material. The buyer is volatile. I need someone watching my back who doesn't flinch when things get loud. Cade rubbed his face. I am not a mercenary. Lyra, I know, she said. You are a father, and if you do this, just this one night, I will secure you a full month's supply of the serum. 30 days. Cade, no rationing, no fear. Cade looked back at the crib in the shadows of the apartment. 30 days. That was an eternity of peace. That was a lifeline he couldn't refuse. Give me 5 minutes, he said. He woke Mrs. Chu, pressing 100 credits into her hand and ignoring her sleepy questions. Then he went to the closet. He pulled out a lockbox from beneath the floorboards. Inside was a kinetic pistol, a heavy, ugly piece of iron that predated the smart-linked energy weapons the cops used. It had no tracking chip, no safety protocols, just stopping power. He strapped the holster under his arm, threw on his jacket, and walked out. The descent into the lower levels was a journey through the digestive tract of the city. The elevator rattled and shook as it bypassed the residential blocks, the commercial sectors, and the industrial zones, plunging deep into the foundations of the megacity. When the doors opened on Sector 12, the air hit Cade like a physical slap. It was hot, humid, and smelled of sewage, frying oil, and ozone. The ceiling here was low, crisscrossed with dripping pipes and bundles of leaking cables that sparked in the gloom. "This is the dregs," Lyra said, stepping out. Her boots splashed in a puddle that reflected the garish pink and green neon of the hollow signs advertising synth flesh brothels and unlicensed gene clinics. They walked through the crowded alleyways. The population here was a carnival of the desperate. Cade saw humans with cybernetic limbs stripped of their synthetic skin, exposing rusty pistons. He saw aliens with 4 arms selling unrecognizable meat on skewers. He saw hooded figures huddled around burning barrels of chemical waste. Lyra moved through the chaos like a queen in exile. The crowd parted for her. A group of thugs with subdermal implants stepped out of the shadows to block their path. But Lyra simply turned her head, her eyes flaring with that amber light. A low growl, vibrating below the range of human hearing, seemed to emanate from her chest. The thugs blanched and stepped aside. She is terrifying, Cade thought, watching her profile, and God, she is magnificent. The meeting point was a decommissioned water processing plant, a cathedral of rusting iron and stagnant pools. They waited on a catwalk overlooking a dark cistern. "Stay back," Lyra instructed, her voice tight. "Keep your eyes on the shadows." A hover skiff rose from the murky water, its engines whining. 3 figures stepped off. The leader was a massive construct, half biological, half machine, with a faceplate of glowing sensors. "You have the drive?" The construct boomed, its voice synthesized. Lyra held up a small data chip. "Gen Core encryption, level 5. It details the supply chain for the new suppression collars." "And the biotics?" "In the crate," Lyra said, gesturing to a box she had carried down. "Pure strain." The construct nodded. "The credits are verified. Transferring now." Cade watched the exchange, his hand hovering near the zipper of his jacket. It was going too smoothly. In his experience, nothing in the dregs went this smoothly. He scanned the upper gantries. A shadow moved where no shadow should be, a glint of metal. "Ambush!" Cade roared, tackling Lyra just as a plasma bolt seared the air where her head had been. The shot slammed into the railing, melting the steel instantly. Lyra hit the deck, rolling smoothly to her feet behind a rusted turbine. Cade slid in beside her, drawing his kinetic pistol. "How many?" Lyra snapped, not looking at him. 4 high, 2 low, Cade replied, his voice shifting into combat cadence. "Professional gear, not gangers." The enforcers dropped from the ceiling on rappel lines, masked figures in sleek, black armor without insignia. They moved with military precision, suppressing the position with rapid-fire energy bursts. "Cover me!" Lyra yelled. Cade popped up, firing 2 controlled double taps. His bullets sparked off the armor of the lead attacker, but the impact knocked the man back. It bought Lyra a second. She didn't use a gun. She stood up, and Cade saw the transformation ripple through her. It wasn't a full shift, the hallway was too small. But it was enough. Her jaw unhinged slightly, her skin hardening into overlapping plates of bronze and gold. Her eyes became infernos. She opened her mouth, and a stream of superheated air, visible only as a distortion wave, blasted outward. It hit the construct buyer, who had drawn a weapon. The heat wave melted the barrel of his rifle into slag instantly. He screamed, a digital screech of feedback, as the heat cooked his sensors. "Move!" Lyra shouted, grabbing Cade's arm. Her grip was crushing, her fingers now tipped with obsidian claws. They sprinted along the catwalk, fire chewing up the grating behind them. An enforcer blocked the exit, a stun baton crackling. Cade didn't break stride. He shoulder-checked the man, using the momentum to drive an elbow into the throat, while Lyra slashed outward with her free hand. The enforcer's armor tore like paper. They fought back-to-back in the narrow corridor leading to the maintenance tunnels. It was a deadly, chaotic dance. Cade provided the range and the tactical call-outs. "Reloading, on your left, frag out," while Lyra provided the raw, elemental destruction. She was faster than any human, catching a thrown grenade and hurling it back before the fuse triggered. The coordination was instinctive. Cade knew when she would duck. She knew when he would fire. It was the intimacy of violence, a connection forged in the adrenaline of survival. "Through the hatch!" Cade yelled, blowing the lock off a service door. They tumbled through into the cool dampness of a ventilation shaft. Cade slammed the door shut and jammed a pipe through the wheel to seal it. They ran until the sounds of pursuit faded, collapsing finally in a dark alcove where the water pipes hummed with the city's pulse. They slumped against the concrete wall, sliding down until they were sitting, shoulders touching. The air in the tunnel was freezing, but heat was radiating off Lyra in waves. Cade gasped for air, his lungs burning. He looked at her. The scales on her face were slowly receding, the golden armor sinking back beneath her skin, but her eyes were still wild, the pupils blown wide. Her chest heaved. There was a smear of blue coolant blood on her cheek. "You," Cade wheezed, "you melted a gun with your breath." Lyra looked at him, wiping the blood away. "You shot 3 men in under 2 seconds. I counted." "Old habits," Cade said. The adrenaline was still spiking in his blood, a chemical cocktail of fear and elation. He looked at her, and the terror he should have felt at her alien nature was gone, replaced by a magnetic pull so strong it made him dizzy. She was dangerous. She was lethal. And she was the only person in this godforsaken city who understood what it was like to be hunted. Lyra turned her head. Their faces were inches apart in the gloom. The heat coming off her was intoxicating. "Are you hurt?" she whispered. "No," Cade said. "You?" "No." The silence stretched, charged and heavy. Cade's hand, which had been resting on the floor, moved. It found her waist. Through the fabric of her bodysuit, he could feel the residual heat of her scales pulsing like a second heartbeat. Lyra didn't pull away. She leaned in. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision. It was rough and hungry, driven by the relief of being alive and the weeks of suppressed longing that had built up between the apartment walls. Lyra tasted of smoke and ozone, her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, her strength formidable. She pressed him back against the cold tunnel wall. Cade groaned low in his throat, his hands sliding up her back, feeling the ridge of her spine. The air around them warmed rapidly, the damp mist evaporating into steam. It was a boundary crossing, a shattering of the careful neighborly distance they had maintained. Lyra's leg hooked over his, pulling him flush against her. For a moment, there was no conspiracy, no hunger, no formula shortage, just the heat. Beep, beep, beep. The sound was faint, tinny, but it cut through the haze like a knife. Cade froze. Lyra froze. They pulled apart, chests heaving, lips swollen. The sound came from Cade's wrist. It was the baby monitor link on his comm bracelet. Wow. Luna. The reality of the world crashed back in. The tunnel, the danger, the baby waiting upstairs. Lyra stepped back, her hand lingering on Cade's chest for a fraction of a second before dropping. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the golden light in her eyes fading back to a dull amber. "Duty calls," she said. Her voice was shaky, trying for levity and missing by a mile. Cade looked at the bracelet. The crying was getting louder. Yeah, duty calls." He looked at her, searching for the words to acknowledge what had just happened. But the language of intimacy felt clumsy after the precision of combat. "We should move," Lyra said, turning away to adjust her coat, "before they find another way in." They made the trek back up to the surface in silence. But it wasn't the empty silence of strangers anymore. It was a thick, conscious silence. Every time their arms brushed in the elevator, Cade felt a phantom spark. When they reached the 7th floor, the hallway was quiet. Mrs. Chu was asleep in Cade's armchair, Luna dozing fitfully in her lap. Cade took the baby, thanking the old woman and ushering her out. Lyra stood in the doorway of his apartment, the metal case of serum in her hand. She had never let go of it, not even during the firefight. 30 days, she said softly, setting the case on the table. As promised. Cade looked at the vials, then he looked at Lyra. She looked vulnerable now. The armor gone, just a woman standing under a flickering light, terrified of her own desires. "Thank you," Cade said, "for everything." Lyra nodded. She reached out, almost touching Luna's sleeping face to but stopped herself. "Get some sleep, Cade." She turned and walked to her door. "Night, Lyra," Cade whispered. He closed the door and locked it. He carried Luna to the crib, his body aching, his mind racing. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. He felt terrified. Outside the window, unnoticed by Cade as he tucked the blanket around his daughter, a faint hum disturbed the smog. A small black drone hovered in the rain, its optical lens zoomed in, bypassing the grime on the glass. It focused on the crib. It focused on the thermal signature of the baby. Then it shifted, focusing on the reflection in the window, the reflection of the woman who had just left. A red light blinked on the drone's chassis. Data packet compiled. The internal processor logged. Subject 7D confirmed. Interaction with Subject 7C confirmed. Anomaly detected in infant biometrics. Transmitting to Director Maris. The drone banked silently and vanished into the neon skyline, carrying the secret that would burn their world down. The notification light on Cade's apartment door pulsed a rhythmic, insistent amber. It was not the red of a lockout or the blue of a utility warning. It was the amber of an official summons. Cade stood in the hallway, holding a piece of synthetic paper that the wall slot had spit out at 6 in the morning. It was a mandatory review order from the Civic Health Bureau. Subsection, Pediatric Welfare. He looked at Lyra's door. It was closed, the dragon sigils dark and dormant. He wanted to knock. He wanted to ask her if this was normal, if the serum had triggered some alarm in the grid. But the summons was time-stamped for 0800 hours. He had 40 minutes. He dressed in his cleanest clothes, trousers that were only slightly frayed at the cuffs and a shirt that buttoned all the way to the neck, hiding the scar tissue on his collarbone. He strapped Luna into the carrier against his chest. She was awake, her eyes bright and unsettlingly intelligent, watching him with that gaze that felt too old for an infant. "We are just going for a walk." "Little moon," Cade muttered, checking his pockets. "Just a walk to the White Room." The Civic Health Bureau was located in Sector 1, the ring of the city directly beneath the apex of the dome. Here, the air was scrubbed until it smelled of nothing. No ozone, no frying oil, No desperate sweat. It smelled of antiseptic and lemon-scented polymer. The waiting room was blindingly white. Chrome chairs were bolted to the floor in precise rows. Cade sat, bouncing his knee nervously. Luna was quiet, but her skin felt warm against his chest, radiating a heat that the building's climate control could not suppress. "Citizen Walker," a disembodied voice announced. "Room 4B." Cade walked down a corridor that felt like the throat of a sterilized beast. The door to 4B slid open with a whisper. The office was sparse. A desk made of glass and steel dominated the center. Behind it sat a man who looked like he had been grown in a vat to approximate human perfection. His skin was poreless, his hair a sculpted helmet of silver, and his suit was a shade of gray that cost more than Cade's entire pension. Director Maris, the nameplate on the desk read. "Sit, please," Maris said. His voice was smooth like oil pouring over ice. Cade sat. He kept his hands over Luna's back. A protective cage. "I am here about the summons," Cade said. "It said there were irregularities in my daughter's file." Maris tapped the desktop surface, and a holographic display flickered to life between them. Charts and biometrics scrolled past. Luna's heart rate, her thermal output, her caloric intake. Irregularities is a polite term. "Mr. Walker," Maris said, smiling without showing his teeth. "Your daughter is fascinating. Her growth metrics are in the 99th percentile. Her metabolic turnover is 3 times the human norm. And yet, according to our supply logs, you have not purchased standard formula in 2 weeks. She has a sensitive stomach," Cade said, sticking to the lie he had rehearsed. "I have been diluting the standard ration, stretching it." Maris leaned forward. The movement was predatory. "Stretching it? And yet she thrives. In fact, her blood markers, which our remote sensors picked up during your last visit to the depot, show traces of enzymes we have not seen in the general population for 20 years. Cade went cold. The depot, the sensors. They had been watching her chemistry even then. "I don't know what you are talking about," Cade said, his voice hardening. Director Maris stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the pristine upper levels of the city. "We have a program, Cade, a classified initiative called the Dragon Integration Program. It was officially disbanded after the war, of course. But science never truly stops. It only goes underground." He turned back, his eyes locking onto Luna. "Your daughter's physiology matches the parameters of the subjects from that program. Specifically, the Hybrid Viability Index." Cade stood up. The chair screeched against the floor. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that a single father, a veteran with untreated PTSD, living in a tenement block. This is not a suitable environment for a child of such unique potential." Maris pressed a button on his desk. "For her safety and for national security, we are recommending an immediate transfer of custody." "Transfer?" Cade stepped back, his hand instinctively going to his belt, though he had left his gun at home. "You want to take her?" "We want to care for her," Maris corrected. "We have a facility, specialized medical staff. She would be studied, yes, but she would be safe. She would be with her own kind." "Her own kind is me," Cade snarled. "She is my daughter. Biologically, perhaps half," Maris said softly. "But the other half, that belongs to the state. Mr. Walker, that belongs to GenCorps." Cade turned for the door. The conversation was over. If they wanted her, they would have to take her over his dead body, and he would make sure the pile of bodies was high enough to reach the ceiling. "Sit down, citizen," Maris commanded, his voice losing its oil and revealing the steel beneath. I am leaving, Cade said. He hit the door release. It didn't move. Maris sighed. Do not make this difficult. We can do this with paperwork, or we can do it with containment teams. Cade spun around. He grabbed the heavy chrome chair he had been sitting in and hurled it at the glass partition of the office. The impact shattered the pane with a deafening crash. Maris flinched, stepping back. Cade didn't wait. He kicked the jagged glass out of the frame and scrambled through, clutching Luna tight. He sprinted down the hallway, ignoring the sudden blare of alarms. He burst through the emergency exit and out into the stairwell, taking the steps 3 at a time, his boots slamming against the concrete. He didn't stop running until he was 5 blocks away, lost in the crowded, smog-choked streets of Sector 4. He slowed to a walk, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He pulled his hood up, checking Luna. She was awake, silent, her eyes wide and reflecting the flashing red lights of the city alerts. He walked past a construction barrier plastered with holographic posters. One of them caught his eye, freezing him in his tracks. It was a propaganda loop. A monstrous caricature of a Draken soldier with exaggerated claws and dripping fangs was looming over a cowering human family. The text scrolled in bold, angry crimson. Purity of essence. Defend humanity. Report hybrid threats. And in the corner of the poster, stamped as a seal of approval, was a familiar emblem. A skull with a lightning bolt through it. The insignia of the 108th Shock Trooper Battalion. Cade's unit. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Smoke, screaming, the smell of burning scales. He leaned against the wall, squeezing his eyes shut, trying to breathe through the flashback. They were using his war, his trauma, to sell the very cage they wanted to put Luna in. He pushed off the wall. He had to get home. He had to get Lyra. When he burst into his apartment, Lyra was already there. She was standing in the middle of his living room, pacing. She looked up as he slammed the door and locked it. "Cade?" she asked, seeing his face. "What happened?" "They know," Cade choked out, putting Luna in the crib and turning to pace the small room. He felt like a caged animal. The Bureau, Director Maris. He knew about the enzymes. He knew about the formula. Lyra went very still. "Maris? You saw Maris?" "He called it the Dragon Integration Program," Cade said, running a hand through his hair. "He said she matches the parameters. He said she belongs to Gen Core." Lyra's face drained of color. The golden scales at her temples flared with a sudden, intense light, betraying a spike of pure terror. "Integration program," she whispered. "They restarted it. I thought it was just a rumor. I thought the labs were cold." She looked at Luna, horror dawning in her eyes. "She is not just a random mutation. Cade. She is a prototype." Cade stopped pacing. He looked at Lyra. The way she said it, it wasn't the surprise of a neighbor. It was the confirmation of an operative. "You knew," Cade said. His voice was quiet. "Dangerous." Lyra looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't try to hide the calculation in her gaze. "I knew there was a signal," she admitted. "Before I moved in, my contact in the Resistance picked up a high-frequency biosignature coming from this block. A dragon-coded signature. You were not just living here," Cade said, stepping closer. "You were hunting. I was scouting." Lyra snapped, her defensive walls slamming down. "My orders were to locate the source of the signal. If it was a weapon, I was to neutralize it. If it was a child, I was to secure it." "Secure it?" Cade repeated, the betrayal tasting like bile. "You mean kidnap her?" "I mean save her," Lyra shouted back. "Do you think you can protect her from Maris? From Gen Core? I was sent to find the child and bring her to the Enclave. We were going to use her as leverage." Leverage, Cade roared. He shoved a chair aside, the sound echoing in the small room. She is a baby, my daughter, and you were going to trade her like a poker chip to stop a genocide? Cade, Lyra's voice cracked, losing its composure. My people are dying in the gutters. If having one special child gives us the power to negotiate a treaty, to stop the raids, yes, I would have done it. She stopped, breathing hard. But I didn't. I didn't take her. I stayed. I brought you milk. I helped you. Because you felt guilty. Cade spat. Or because you were waiting for her to get big enough to move. I stayed because I saw a father trying to do the impossible, Lyra yelled. I stayed because... Boom! The door to the apartment exploded inward. Metal shrapnel sprayed across the room. Cade tackled Lyra, driving her to the floor as a stun grenade bounced into the kitchen. Flash. The world went white and ringing silent. Cade shook his head, his vision swimming. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the heavy tread of boots. Armored boots. Civic protection, a distorted voice boomed from the hallway. Secure the asset. Neutralize the hostiles. Cade rolled, grabbing his kinetic pistol from the table where he had tossed it. He fired blindly into the smoke. 2 rounds. He heard a grunt of pain. Lyra was moving. She crawled toward the wall shared with her apartment. She slammed her hand against a specific section of the plaster. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a glowing console. She punched a code. The wall between the apartments groaned. Then, with a mechanical hiss, sections of the drywall folded outward, revealing heavy, dragon-forged metal plating underneath. Emitters embedded in the plates flared to life, projecting a shimmering heat shield across the room. Get Luna, Lyra screamed, her eyes blazing fully serpentine. Cade scrambled to the crib. Luna was screaming, terrified by the noise. He grabbed her, shielding her head with his body. Bullets sparked against the energy shield Lyra had activated. The room was filling with smoke and the smell of ozone. Into the vents, Lyra commanded. She grabbed a heavy table and flipped it for cover, then pointed to the maintenance hatch in the ceiling of the kitchenette. They will be waiting in the hall. We have to go up and over. Cade boosted Lyra up. She ripped the grate off the hinges with terrifying strength. She pulled herself up, then reached down. Hand her to me. Cade hesitated. For a split second, looking at the woman who had just admitted she was sent to steal his child. He couldn't do it. Trust me or she dies, Lyra shouted, her hand extended, claws visible. Cade looked at the door. Black-clad troopers were pouring in. He looked at Lyra. He handed Luna up. Lyra took the baby gently, cradling her against her shoulder. Cade jumped, grabbing the edge of the vent. Lyra hauled him up with one arm, her strength inhuman. They scrambled into the darkness of the service crawl space just as the apartment below was flooded with suppression foam. They crawled for what felt like miles. The shafts were tight, claustrophobic, and smelled of dust and old grease. Cade went first now, navigating by the schematics he had memorized years ago when the building was first constructed, a soldier's habit of knowing the exits. They dropped down into a vertical utility chute, sliding down cables, landing in the sub-basement levels. The air here was cooler, damp. They kept moving, avoiding the main concourses. The city's PA system was blaring now. Alert, biocontainment breach in Sector 7. Fugitives armed and dangerous. Report all sightings. They found shelter in an abandoned transit station, a relic from before the dome, when trains ran on rails instead of maglevs. The platform was cracked, weeds growing through the concrete. The only light came from a sputtering emergency bulb. Cade collapsed on a bench, his chest heaving. He checked Luna. She was dusty and whimpering, but unhurt. He mixed a bottle of the serum, the last one Lyra had in her coat pocket, and fed her. Lyra stood by the edge of the platform, looking down into the dark tunnel. She was trembling. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the jagged wreckage of their argument. "So," Cade said, his voice flat in the echoing station. "What now? Do you take her to the Enclave? Trade her for a treaty?" Lyra turned. She looked wrecked. Her hair was loose, wild, and the scales on her face were dull, grayed by exhaustion. "No," she whispered. "Why not? That was the mission, wasn't it?" "It was," Lyra said. She walked over and sat on the bench, leaving a foot of distance between them. "But I can't." She looked at Luna, who was sucking contentedly on the bottle. "I sat in those meetings. Cade, the Elder Council. They talk about the greater good. They talk about sacrifice. But they are just like Maris, just like the generals. They see numbers. They don't see the child." She looked up at Cade. "If I take her to them, they will put her in a lab. Maybe a nicer lab than Gencor's, with better food and soft beds. But it will still be a cage. They will drain her blood to make serums. They will breed her when she is old enough." "I won't let that happen," Cade said. "I know," Lyra said, "and I won't let it happen either." She took a deep breath. "I am burned, Cade. If I don't bring the asset, I am a traitor to my people. If I don't surrender to Maris, I am a terrorist to the state. I have nowhere left." "You have us," Cade said. The words were out before he could stop them. He didn't know if he meant them, but they felt true. Lyra looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. "You still don't trust me?" "No," Cade admitted. "I don't. But I need you. And you seem to be the only one with a plan." "The plan has changed," Lyra said. "We can't go to the safe house I set up. It is compromised. We have to go deeper." "How deep?" "Below the foundations. There is a legend, a rumor, really, of an old enclave, a sanctuary that cut ties with the political factions years ago. They are fanatics, maybe, or monks. But they don't answer to the council, and they hate Gencor. Do you know where it is?" "I know the way to the gate," Lyra said. "But getting there, we have to cross the Deep Down." The Deep Down was the space between the city's bottom layer and the planet's original crust. It was a no-man's land of smugglers, feral mutants, and crumbling infrastructure. "We go," Cade said. "We don't have a choice." They moved out. They found a freight elevator used by the smuggler gangs, a rusted metal cage that descended into the dark. It was a slow, rattling journey that would take hours. The elevator car was small. There was a single, filthy mattress in the corner. As the cage descended, the air grew cold, biting into their bones. They took shifts sleeping. Cade watched the first 4 hours, his pistol in his lap, while Lyra curled up around Luna on the mattress. He watched them sleep. The dragon woman and his human daughter. They looked like they belonged together, two outcasts in a falling world. When Lyra woke, she took the watch without a word. Cade lay down. He was exhausted, his body shutting down. He fell into a nightmare instantly. He was back in the jungle on the rim. The air smelled of napalm. He was in the dropship, his hand on the release lever. Target confirmed, insurgent stronghold. He pulled the lever. The payload dropped, but instead of explosions, he heard crying. He looked down. The village wasn't a stronghold. It was a nursery. The fire swept through the huts and through the flames. He saw dragons, not monsters, but people. Mothers shielding children. Burning scales. Cade woke up with a gasp, his body jerking upright. He was shaking violently, sweat soaking his shirt despite the cold. Hey, you are here. Lyra was there. She had dropped to her knees beside the mattress. Her hands were on his shoulders, gripping tight. Her skin was warm, anchoring him. Cade stared at her, his eyes wild. I did it, he rasped. The words tore out of his throat. Did what? Lyra asked softly. The village, Cade whispered. During the war, Sector 8, I was the bombardier. I dropped the payload. Lyra went rigid. Her hands froze on his shoulders. Sector 8. That was the Great Burning. I didn't know. Cade sobbed, the guilt he had carried for 10 years finally breaking the dam. Intel said it was a munitions depot. They said it was empty of civilians. I pulled the lever. Lyra. I watched it burn. I saw the scales melting. Lyra pulled her hands back as if he burned her. She stood up, backing away to the mesh wall of the elevator. Her breathing was ragged. Her eyes glowed with a furious, terrible light. My cousins were in Sector 8, she said. Her voice was trembling. My aunt. Cade put his head in his hands. I know I am a monster. You should throw me out of this cage. The silence in the elevator was louder than the grinding gears. Cade waited for the blow. He waited for the fire, but it didn't come. He heard a sigh, a long shuddering exhale that sounded like a structure collapsing. Then, he felt the warmth return. Lyra knelt back down. She didn't touch him at first. We were all monsters then. Cade, she whispered. Or we were tools for monsters. She reached out and took his face in her hands. Her palms were hot, her scales rough against his stubble. She forced him to look at her. You are not that man anymore. That man didn't carry a baby through a ventilation shaft. I killed them, Cade said, tears leaking from his eyes. And now you are saving one, Lyra said fiercely. That has to matter. It has to. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against his. The contact was grounding. Cade grabbed her wrists, holding on like a drowning man. The anger in her aura faded, replaced by a profound aching sadness, and something else, a desperate need for connection in the void. Lyra shifted, pulling him into her arms. Cade buried his face in the crook of her neck, smelling the cinnamon and ozone. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her down onto the mattress with him. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was gravity. Lyra shifted her weight, straddling his lap, her hands tangling in his hair. She looked down at him, her eyes searching his face. Cade. She breathed. She lowered her mouth to his. This wasn't the rough combat-high kiss of the tunnel. This was slow, deep. It tasted of salt and grief. Cade kissed her back with everything he had, pouring his guilt and his gratitude into the motion. Lyra made a low sound in her throat, pressing her body flush against his. He could feel the hardness of the scales along her ribs, the softness of the curves beneath. His hands slid up her back, under the tactical vest, touching the warm skin. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the heat of their bodies and the rhythm of their breath. They were teetering on the edge of something irrevocable. Cade's hand moved to the clasp of her vest. Lyra's fingers dug into his shoulders, pulling him closer. Then, they both froze. It wasn't a sound. It was the sudden, crushing weight of reality and the fear. If they did this, if they crossed this line fully, there was no going back. It would mean they were more than allies. It would mean they had something else to lose. Lyra pulled back, just an inch. Her lips were swollen, her eyes dark. We can't, she whispered. Not here. Not like this. Cade nodded, his forehead resting against hers. He couldn't trust himself not to break apart if he let her in completely. "Not yet." "You are right," he murmured. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the dark, swaying with the motion of the cage. It was an intimacy deeper than sex. It was the intimacy of two shattered people trying to hold the pieces of each other together. Hours later, the elevator groaned to a halt. "We are here," Lyra said, her voice husky. They gathered their gear. Cade strapped Luna back to his chest. He felt different, lighter, somehow, as if the confession had drained some of the poison from his blood. They stepped out into a cavernous space. The air was still and cold. They were standing on a ledge of rock that overlooked a massive abyss. A single stone bridge arched across the darkness. At the end of the bridge stood a door. It was immense, carved from black obsidian, rising 50 feet into the gloom. The surface was etched with dragons, not the monsters of the posters, but noble, soaring creatures wrapped around celestial bodies. Guarding the door were two figures. They were tall, wrapped in cloaks of deep crimson fabric that seemed to absorb the light. They held staffs tipped with glowing crystals. As Cade and Lyra approached, the hoods of the guards turned. Beneath the fabric, eyes glowed, 4 eyes, vertical slits of burning amber. Lyra stepped forward. She raised her hand, palm out. "We seek sanctuary," she called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Blood of the sky, return to the stone." The guards did not move for a long moment. Then, in unison, they slammed the butts of their staffs against the ground. The sound was like a thunder crack. The massive obsidian door began to groan. Dust fell from the carvings as the seam in the center split. A beam of light poured out from the opening. It wasn't the white of the bureau or the neon of the city. It was a deep, rich crimson, like the heart of a dying star. "Welcome to the underworld," Lyra whispered to Cade. She took his hand. He squeezed it back. Together. They stepped across the threshold, into the red light and the heart of the conspiracy. The crimson light that spilled from the opening of the obsidian doors was not just illumination. It was a physical weight, heavy with the scent of sulfur and ancient, stagnant air. Cade stepped through the threshold, his hand gripping the strap of the baby carrier where Luna slept, and felt the atmosphere of the world shift entirely. They had entered a geode the size of a city. The Draken Enclave was a sprawling subterranean metropolis built into the walls of a massive volcanic fissure. Above them, the ceiling was lost in shadow, but the space was lit by thousands of floating orbs of fire, maglev containment fields holding raw plasma that drifted like lazy burning stars. Below, deep veins of bioluminescent crystal pulsed in the rock, casting a bruised purple glow that warred with the red of the fire orbs. The architecture was not like the brutalist concrete of the surface dome. Here, buildings were carved directly from the stone, shaped to resemble coiling dragons, their mouths forming archways and their wings forming bridges that spanned the dizzying drops between stalagmites. It was hauntingly beautiful, a place of myth surviving in the dark. It was also a fortress. As Cade and Lyra walked across the main causeway, he saw the eyes. Hundreds of them. Draken warriors stood on the ridges, their silhouettes backlit by the magma flows deep below. They wore armor made of bone and scavenged high-tech composites. Some were fully shifted, their faces elongated and scaled. Others looked human until the light caught the vertical slits of their pupils. They watched Lyra with recognition, but they watched Cade with open hostility. He was a human, a surface dweller, a soldier, and he was carrying a child that smelled of their blood. "Keep moving," Lyra murmured, her shoulder brushing his. "Do not make eye contact. Do not reach for your weapon." "I know the drill," Cade said. though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "It feels like a kill box." "It is," she said, "but it is my home." They reached the end of the causeway, where a massive citadel rose from the center of the cavern. It was guarded by elites in gold-trimmed armor. They did not block the path. They stepped aside, their movements synchronized, bowing their heads slightly as Lyra passed. Cade frowned. "That is a lot of respect for a smuggler," he whispered. Lyra did not answer. Her jaw was set, her expression grim. They entered the citadel's main hall, a chamber vast enough to house a starship. At the far end, sitting on a throne carved from a single piece of white dragon bone, sat a figure who radiated power. He was old. His hair was a mane of white, and his face was a map of deep fissures and scales that looked like hardened granite. He wore robes of heavy, embroidered silk, but underneath, Cade saw the glint of powered armor. The figure stood as they approached. He was 7 feet tall, imposing and terrifying. "You have returned," the old Draken boomed. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "And you have brought the prize." Lyra stopped 10 paces from the throne. She did not bow. She stood tall, her hands clenched at her sides. "I am not your courier." "Father," she said, her voice ice-cold. Cade froze. He looked from Lyra to the giant on the throne. The resemblance was there, the sharp cheekbones, the arrogance in the stance, the burning amber eyes. "Father?" Cade breathed. Elder Veros descended the steps of the dais. He ignored Cade entirely, his gaze fixed on Lyra. "You are my blood," Veros said. "Therefore you serve the Enclave. I sent you to retrieve the asset. Lyra, you are 3 weeks late, and you have brought a human into the inner sanctum. This is reckless, even for you." "I brought a father," Lyra snapped, "and the child is not an asset. Her name is Luna." Veros finally looked at Cade. The weight of his gaze was physical, a pressure on Cade's chest. The elder sniffed the air, his lip curling in distaste. "A soldier," Veros said. "I smell the ozone on him, and the blood of our kin. Why is he still breathing?" "Because he saved the child," Lyra said, stepping between Cade and her father. "And because he is under my protection." Veros laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Your protection? You are an exile girl. You live in the gutters of the human city, playing at espionage. You have no authority here." He waved a hand, and the guards in the room stepped forward, their spears lowered. "Secure the child," Veros commanded. "Dispose of the human." "No!" Lyra shouted. Her voice changed. It deepened, resonating with a sub-bass frequency that shook the dust from the ceiling. Scales flared along her neck and arms, glowing bright gold. "If you touch him," she snarled, her eyes fully reptilian, "I will burn this hall to ash. You know I can do it, Father. You know what I inherited from Mother." Veros paused. He looked at his daughter, gauging the threat. Then he raised a hand, halting the guards. "Emotion over logic," he sneered. "Always your weakness. Very well. Let us speak." He turned and walked into a side chamber, a war room filled with holographic maps of the city above. Cade and Lyra followed, Cade keeping one hand on his pistol grip, the other on Luna. In the war room, Veros revealed the truth. He activated a console, and a stream of stolen GenCore data projected into the air. "You think this is simple? Human?" Veros asked, looking at Cade. "You think you just happen to have a baby with a rare condition?" Cade stared at the floating images. He saw DNA strands. He saw dates. He saw lists of names. "GenCore never stopped the program," Veros said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rumble. "The Dragon integration program. They realized that growing hybrids in tanks failed. The biological rejection rate was too high. They needed a bridge. They needed human mothers to carry the DNA, to filter the incompatibilities. He tapped a key. A profile appeared. A woman's face. Cade's breath hitched. It was Sarah, his wife, Luna's mother. She was selected, Veros said coldly. Screened from the general population. Genetic markers compatible with Draken enzymes. Cade felt the room spin. Selected? No. We met at a coffee shop. It was random. Nothing in this city is random, Veros said, and neither were you, Sergeant Walker. Another profile appeared next to Sarah's, Cade's face, younger, in his dress uniform. Subject Cade Walker, Veros read, 108th Battalion, highly decorated, psychological profile, loyal, protective, accustomed to following orders, desensitized to Draken biology due to combat exposure. Cade stepped back, hitting the edge of the map table. Desensitized. They picked you, Cade, Veros said mercilessly. They needed a father who had experience with us, someone who would not panic when the baby was born with scales. Someone who would instinctively protect the mission asset because he is programmed to protect. You were not a husband. You were a handler, a breeding partner chosen by an algorithm. No, Cade whispered. That is a lie. She loved me. Perhaps, Veros said with a shrug. Emotions are a side effect of biology, but she was planted in your path. And when she died, that was likely part of the plan too. A complication removed to isolate the subject. Cade looked at Lyra. He wanted her to deny it. He wanted her to tell her father to shut up. But Lyra looked sick. She was staring at the data stream, her hand covering her mouth. She knew the tech. She knew the methods. It fits, she whispered. The timeline fits. Cade felt a scream building in his chest. His entire life, his marriage, his grief, his struggle to keep Luna alive. It was all a script? He was just a lab rat in a maze? And you? Cade turned to Lyra, his voice shaking. You were part of this? I was sent to find the result, Veros interjected. When our spies detected the birth, I sent Lyra. Her mission was simple. Extract the hybrid. We need the child. Why? Cade asked. To save her? To use her, Veros said plainly. The regime has restarted the program because they want super soldiers. If we have the prototype, we have leverage. We can trade her for the return of the outer sectors, or we can raise her to lead our own armies. She is a key. Human. Nothing more? Lyra looked at Cade. I didn't know about Sarah, she said, her voice desperate. I swear. Cade. I didn't know they engineered your marriage. But you were going to steal her, Cade said. You knocked on my door. You gave me the milk. You made me trust you. And all the while, you were just waiting for the right moment to grab her and bring her here to be a bargaining chip. Lyra flinched. Yes, she admitted. That was the order. But I didn't do it. Because you got caught, Cade yelled. Because I fell for you, Lyra shouted back. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Veros watched them with cold amusement, touching, but irrelevant. The past is written. Now we deal with the present. He tapped the console again. The map zoomed in on a specific sector of the outer rim. A jungle region. Sector 8, Veros mused. The data on you is comprehensive. Sergeant, it says you were the bombardier for the raid on the Pyre Ridge. Cade went rigid. The blood drained from his face. Lyra froze. She looked at the map. Pyre Ridge. That was where my village was, Lyra whispered. That was where my mother lived. My brothers. She turned slowly to face Cade. Her eyes were wide, the pupils expanding until they swallowed the amber irises. Cade couldn't breathe. He couldn't lie. Not here. Not now. I was there, he croaked. You were the bombardier, Veros repeated, smiling cruelly. You dropped the incendiaries. Lyra looked at Cade. She didn't scream. She didn't strike him. She just looked at him as if he had turned into a monster before her eyes. You, she said. Her voice was barely audible. It was you. Lyra, Cade started, reaching out. Don't, she shrieked. The sound was not human. It was a roar of pure primal agony. The air in the room ignited. Lyra's form blurred. Her skin hardened into bronze armor. Her fingers lengthened into razor-sharp talons. Her hair seemed to float, wreathed in heat. You killed them, she screamed. My mother, she was a healer. My brothers were 6 years old. You burned them alive. I didn't know, Cade shouted, tears streaming down his face. I was following orders. They said it was a depot. You dropped the fire. Lyra roared. She lunged. It was a blur of motion. Lyra pinned Cade against the stone wall, her clawed hand around his throat. She lifted him off the ground. Her face was inches from his, a mask of draconic fury. Her breath was hot enough to singe his eyebrows. Cade didn't fight back. He hung there, looking into the eyes of the woman he had started to love, seeing only hatred. Do it, he rasped, choking. I deserve it. Do it. Lyra's hand tightened. Her claws pricked his skin. A trickle of blood ran down his neck. She was shaking, vibrating with the need to crush his windpipe, to erase the source of her pain. Veros watched, his arms crossed. Justice, he murmured. Finish it, daughter. Prove you are Draken. Lyra stared at Cade. She saw the grief in his eyes. She saw the resignation. He wasn't afraid to die. He was already dead inside. She looked down. Luna, strapped to Cade's chest, began to cry. A terrified, high-pitched wail. The sound cut through the red haze of Lyra's rage. She looked at the baby who was half human, half dragon. The baby Cade had starved himself to feed. Lyra let out a scream of frustration and hurled Cade away. He hit the floor hard, gasping for air. Lyra stood over him, breathing heavily, her scales slowly receding, leaving her skin flushed and tear-streaked. I should kill you, she whispered. Every instinct I have screams to kill you. Then why didn't you? Veros asked, sounding disappointed. Because he is not the one who ordered the strike, Lyra spat, turning on her father. And because killing him doesn't bring them back. It just leaves this child alone. She pointed at Luna. She is innocent, and she needs him. Veros stepped forward. She does not need a war criminal. She needs the Enclave. He reached for Luna. We will take her to the hatchery wing. She will be raised among her own, secure, protected. Cade scrambled to his feet, placing himself between the elder and the baby. His hand went to his pistol, though he knew it was useless against the armored giant. She is not going to any wing, Cade said, his voice raspy but steady. She is staying with me. She is a hybrid, Veros thundered. She is the property of the state or the property of the Enclave. She cannot be just a child. She is my daughter, Cade yelled back, and I am done with people using her as a variable. He looked at Lyra. He didn't know if she would help him. He didn't know if she would kill him. Lyra looked at her father. If you try to take her by force, she said quietly, you will have to kill me first, and I will take half the citadel with me. Veros stared at them, the human soldier and his traitorous daughter, united by a fragile, impossible line. He scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. Sentimental fools. Very well. Keep the child for tonight. We have guest quarters prepared. But do not think this is over. The council meets tomorrow. The other elders will not be so lenient. They want blood, Lyra, or they want the prize. He turned his back on them. Get out of my sight. They were escorted to a chamber deep in the residential spires. It was a stone room, austere but comfortable. lit by the glowing embers of a hearth. The heavy door slammed shut and locked behind them. Cade unstrapped Luna and placed her on the fur-lined bed. She fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted by the day's trauma. Cade turned to face Lyra. She was standing by the hearth, staring into the fire. Her back was to him. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. "Lyra," Cade started. "Don't speak," she said. Her voice was brittle. "Don't tell me you are sorry. Don't tell me it was war. I know what war is." She turned around. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. "I look at you, and I see the fire. Cade, I see my mother's house burning. I know," Cade said. He stood there, arms hanging by his sides. "I see it too. Every night." He walked toward her. He didn't know why. He should have stayed back. But the magnetic pull of their shared damage was overwhelming. "You should hate me," he said. "I do," she whispered. "I hate you so much it hurts." She took a step toward him. "And I can't stop thinking about you." "What?" Cade breathed. Lyra closed the distance. She poked him in the chest, hard. "I hate you because you are a murderer. And I hate you because you are the only man I have ever met who looks at that baby and sees a person, not a weapon. I hate you because you made me care." She hit his chest again, a closed fist that felt like a hammer blow. "You complicated everything. I was supposed to be a ghost. I was supposed to steal the child and leave." She hit him again. Cade caught her fist. He held her hand. Her skin was burning hot. "I wish you had," Cade whispered. "Maybe it would have been easier." Lyra looked up at him. Her expression crumbled. She lunged at him, but this time, it wasn't to kill. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket and slammed him against the stone wall. She kissed him. It was a kiss born of fury and grief. It was violent. Cade's head hit the stone, but he didn't feel the pain. He felt her. He felt the desperation in her mouth, the taste of salt and smoke. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her body against his. They were two disasters colliding. There was no gentleness here. It was a purging. Lyra's hands were everywhere, tearing at his clothes, her claws snagging the fabric. Cade gripped her waist, lifting her, pinning her against the wall. She wrapped her legs around him, her scales rough against his sides. They kissed until they couldn't breathe, gasping for air only to dive back in. It was a rejection of the death they had both caused. It was a frantic assertion that they were still alive. Lyra pulled back, her forehead resting against his, their breaths mingling in ragged gasps. "This changes nothing," she panted. "You are still the enemy." "I know," Cade said, kissing her neck, feeling the pulse hammering there. "I know." "I should kill you," she whispered, tilting her head back, her fingers digging into his shoulders. "Do it," Cade murmured against her skin. They were teetering on the edge of oblivion. The bed was feet away. The need to lose themselves in each other, to drown out the voices of the dead with the sensation of the living, was overpowering. Whimper. The sound was soft, barely a breath, but it froze them both instantly. Cade stopped. Lyra stopped. They turned their heads. Luna was shifting on the bed, her small face scrunching up in sleep, a nightmare disturbing her rest. The presence of the child, the innocent life that stood between their warring histories, shattered the moment. Lyra slid down from Cade's grasp. She stepped back, straightening her disheveled clothes, and her hands were shaking. She looked at Cade. The heat was still there, burning in her eyes, but the wall was back up. "We can't," she said. Her voice was hollow. "No." Cade agreed. "We can't." He walked over to the hearth, putting distance between them. He felt raw, exposed, his skin tingling where she had touched him. They stood in silence for a long time, the only sound the crackle of the embers. They were trapped in a room together, trapped in a conspiracy together, bound by blood and spilled blood. "I am going to check the perimeter," Lyra said abruptly. "I need air." "You can't leave," Cade said. "The door is locked." "Not for me," Lyra said. She walked to the wall, pressing a hidden mechanism in the stone. A section of the floor slid away, revealing a dark tunnel. "There are always ways out." "Cade." She didn't look back. She dropped into the tunnel and vanished. Cade sat on the floor by the bed, his pistol in his hand, watching over Luna. He didn't sleep. Lyra moved through the service tunnels of the Citadel like a phantom. She needed to run. She needed to burn off the energy that was coursing through her veins, the mix of hatred and desire that was driving her mad. She found herself in the lower logistical levels. This area was supposed to be empty at this hour, but she heard voices. She froze, blending into the shadows of a crystal pillar. Two figures were walking down a corridor that led to the private docking bay, a bay reserved for deep-crust transports. One was her father, Veros. The other was a human. He wore a gray suit that looked pristine against the dark rock. Lyra's blood ran cold. She recognized the profile, the silver hair, the predator's walk, Director Maris. Lyra crept closer, her heart pounding so hard she feared they would hear it. She amplified her hearing, straining to catch their words. "Unfortunate delay," Veros was saying. "My daughter is sentimental, but the asset is secured." "She is here?" Maris asked. His voice was smooth, echoing slightly in the tunnel. "She is in custody," Veros lied. "We are preparing the transfer protocol. But the terms must be honored. Director?" "Of course," Maris said. "GenCore keeps its bargains. You hand over the prototype and the other viable hybrids you have collected, and we grant the Enclave autonomy over Sector 12. We pull the drones back. You get your territory. We get our research." "And the data?" Veros asked. "The records of the surrogacy program?" "Deleted from the public grid," Maris promised. "No one needs to know how the sausage is made." "Elder." Lyra pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Veros was selling them out. He wasn't just handing over Luna. He was handing over all the hybrid children they had rescued over the years. He was trading the future of their race for a slum sector and a truce that wouldn't last 5 years. And he had let the enemy into the heart of the sanctuary. Lyra waited until they rounded the corner. Then she turned and ran. She didn't run to the exit. She ran back to the room. She burst out of the floor tunnel, startling Cade, who raised his gun. "We have to move," Lyra said, breathless. "Now." "What happened?" Cade asked, seeing the terror in her face. "Maris is here," she said. "My father brought him in. They made a deal." "What deal?" "Luna," Lyra said. "And the others? Veros is trading them for land. He is selling us out." Cade stood up. He didn't ask questions. He holstered his gun and picked up Luna. "Where are we going?" "To the council chamber," Lyra said, her eyes blazing with a cold, hard resolve. "The elders are meeting now. Veros is trying to do this quietly, behind closed doors." "We are going to make it loud," Cade said, understanding. "Very loud." They moved through the halls, Lyra using her clearance codes to bypass the checkpoints. They reached the massive double doors of the High Council chamber. Inside, they could hear the murmur of voices. Lyra turned to Cade. "If we go in there, there is no going back," she said. "I am declaring war on my father, on my tribe." Cade looked at her. He saw the woman who had brought him milk, the woman who had fought beside him in the tunnels, the woman whose family he had killed, and who still stood between him and the dark. "I am with you," he said. "Until the end?" Lyra nodded. She took a deep breath. Her scales flared, glowing brighter than Cade had ever seen them. She kicked the doors open. The boom echoed like a cannon shot. The council chamber fell silent. 12 elders sat around a circular table of obsidian. Varos was at the head. He stood up, his face twisting in fury. "Lyra!" he bellowed. "You dare interrupt the High Council? I dare more than that. Father!" Lyra shouted, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the dome. She marched into the center of the room, Cade at her side, gun drawn but lowered, Luna strapped to his chest. "I dare to call you a traitor," Lyra announced, pointing a clawed finger at Varos. Gasps rippled through the room. "She is mad," Varos snarled. "Guards! Remove her! He is meeting with Gencor!" Lyra screamed, silencing the guards who had started to move. "Director Maris is in the Citadel right now." "I saw them," the other elders murmured, looking at Varos with sudden suspicion. "Is this true?" "Varos?" an elder with emerald scales asked. "You allowed a human official into the sanctuary?" "It is diplomacy," Varos shouted, losing his cool. "I am securing our future. I am trading a few half-breed abominations for our freedom." He pointed at Luna. "That child is a weapon. Why should we die to protect a human's experiment? Give her to Maris, and we get Sector 12. We get peace." Lyra stepped forward. The floor beneath her feet began to smoke. "There is no peace with monsters." "Father," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "And that child is not an experiment. She is the future. She is what we could be if we stopped fighting the past." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every elder. "I will not let you sell her. I will not let you sell any of them. If you want her, you have to go through me." "And me," Cade said, stepping up beside her. Varos laughed. "A human? You think a human scares us?" Lyra looked at Cade. She took his hand. Her grip was iron. "No," she said softly, "but a family should." She looked back at her father, and the lines of loyalty snapped forever. "I renounce you, Varos," she declared, using the ancient formal challenge. "You are not my elder. You are not my father. You are a merchant of flesh." Varos roared, drawing a jagged blade from his belt. "Then die with them." The room exploded into chaos. The safe house was a hollowed-out pocket of rock located 3 levels below the main Draken citadel, a place where the air was cold and the hum of the city's geothermal vents vibrated in the teeth. It was a smuggler's den, cluttered with stolen tech, crates of nutrient paste, and coils of fiber-optic cable that looked like the intestines of a robotic beast. Sarah, a Draken with scales the color of oxidized copper and a perpetually bored expression, tapped a stylus against a holographic map projection that hovered in the center of the room. "If you two are done making eyes at each other," Sarah drawled, her voice dry as dust, "the revolution is waiting. And honestly, the tension is making my scales itch. It is like watching a forbidden interspecies soap opera, but with more guns and less production value." Cade blinked, pulling his gaze away from Lyra. He was leaning against a crate of munitions, his arms crossed, but his eyes had been tracking Lyra's every movement as she paced the small room. "We are focused," Cade said, his voice gruff. Lyra stopped pacing. She looked worn, her trench coat dusty and her hair tied back in a messy knot, but the fire in her amber eyes was undimmed. "Show us the entry point again." "Sarah," Lyra commanded. Sarah sighed, manipulating the hologram with a flick of her clawed fingers. The image resolved into the towering, needle-like structure of the Gencor headquarters. It pierced the smog of the upper city like a syringe. "Okay. Listen closely because I am only explaining this once. Sarah said. This is the main ventilation exchange for Sector 1. It feeds directly into the GenCore climate control grid. It is tight, it is hot, and it is full of sensors that can smell a rat's heartbeat from 50 meters away. We are not rats, Lyra said. No, you are a heat-generating lizard and he is a sweating mammal. Sarah retorted, which is worse. But if Lyra can modulate her thermal output to mask both of you, and if Soldier Boy here can bypass the kinetic locks on the maintenance hatch without tripping the silent alarm, you might get into the sub-basement. And the data core? Cade asked. Top floor, Sarah said, pointing to the apex of the tower. Obviously, villains always put their secrets in the penthouse. It is a psychology thing. You have to climb 100 stories of high-security corporate hell. Plug this drive into the mainframe, and let me do the rest from down here. I am not staying down here, Sarah added quickly. I am going with you. Someone has to make sure you do not get distracted by your tragic backstories and get us all killed. Cade looked at the map. It was a suicide run. In the old days, with his unit. He would have called for air support and a demolition team. Now, all he had was a kinetic pistol, a baby strapped to his chest, and a woman who could melt steel with her breath. He looked down at Luna, who was sleeping in the travel carrier he had reinforced with padding from a flak jacket. He couldn't leave her. Not here. Not with Veros hunting them and Maris closing the net. We move at 0300, Cade said. The shift change for the drone perimeter. Sarah clapped her hands mockingly. A plan. Groundbreaking. I will go prep the signal boosters. Try not to brood too loudly while I am gone. Sarah vanished into the back alcove, leaving Cade and Lyra alone in the dim light of the bioluminescent moss that lined the cave walls. The silence that fell between them was heavy, but it wasn't the jagged, angry silence of the enclave room. It was thick with things unsaid. Lyra walked over to him. She didn't stop until she was standing inside his personal space, the heat radiating from her body warming the chill air. She reached out, her fingers ghosting over the scar on his shoulder, the place where shrapnel from a mortar round had nearly taken his arm 5 years ago. You are thinking about the climb, she said softly. I am thinking about the drop, Cade corrected. Lyra smiled, a sad, fleeting thing. You always look for the worst-case scenario. Cade, it keeps me alive. Does it? She tilted her head, her vertical pupils widening. Or does it just keep you waiting for the end? Cade caught her hand. Her skin was rough where the scales began at her wrist, but her palm was soft. He held it against his chest, over his heart. I am terrified. Lyra, he admitted. Not of the tower. I have climbed towers before. I am terrified of losing this. He gestured vaguely between them, encompassing the baby, the safe house, the strange, fragile connection they had forged in the fire. Lyra stepped closer. Her other hand came up to cup his jaw. Her thumb traced his lower lip. Then don't lose it, she whispered. Hold on to it. She kissed him. It started slow. A question asked and answered. Cade made a low sound in his throat and pulled her against him, burying his hands in her hair. The kiss deepened, becoming urgent, a desperate attempt to bridge the gap between their species and their histories. They moved blindly toward the side chamber, a small alcove draped in heavy, woven Draken fabrics that smelled of earth and smoke. Cade lowered her onto the furs, following her down. There was a moment of hesitation. Cade pulled back, looking at her, really looking at her. He saw the scales that framed her face, the alien gold of her eyes, the strength in her shoulders. He remembered the village. He remembered the fire. Lyra saw the shadow cross his face. I am not them, she whispered fiercely, reading his mind. And you are not the bomb. You are the man who held me in the dark. She pulled him down. They crossed the line they had drawn in the sand. It was an act of reclamation. As they moved together, skin against skin, heat against heat, it wasn't just about desire. It was about grief. It was Cade apologizing with his hands, with his mouth, for the pain he had caused. It was Lyra forgiving him, taking the weight of his guilt and burning it away with her touch. Her body was a landscape of contrasts, the intense feverish warmth of her blood, the hardness of the scales along her spine and ribs, the softness of her stomach. Cade mapped her with a reverence that bordered on worship. When she arched against him, her breath hitching, her scales flared with a soft golden light, illuminating the dark room like embers in ash. They moved with a mix of hesitation and hunger, constantly checking in without words, a touch to the cheek, a squeeze of the hand, turning the violence that had defined their relationship into something tender and consensual. It was a rewrite of their history. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the heavy blankets. Cade's arm was draped over her waist. Lyra's head rested on his chest. Luna slept soundly in her carrier a few feet away, the rhythm of her breathing matching theirs. Cade traced the line of golden scales on Lyra's arm. "Do you think we can really come back from it?" he asked quietly. "The war? What I did? Forgiveness is messy," Lyra murmured, her voice sleepy and content. "It is not a destination. Cade, it is a road. You walk it every day. Some days you stumble. Some days you want to turn back. But you keep walking." She shifted, looking up at him. "Love doesn't erase the wrongdoing. It doesn't make the dead come back. But it reshapes what comes next. It gives us a reason to build something new." She looked over at Luna. "Family isn't blood," Lyra said, "and it is certainly not an experiment in a Gen Core lab. Family is what you choose, and I choose you. Cade Walker. I choose the baby." Cade kissed her forehead. "I choose you too. Dragon Woman." Sarah cleared her throat loudly from the main room. "I am going to vomit," she announced. "Seriously, if you two are quite finished bonding, we have a corporate empire to topple. It is 0250. Time to go." The infiltration began in the sewers. They moved through the subterranean drainage pipes that ran beneath the city's foundation, wading through knee-deep sludge that Cade tried very hard not to think about. Sarah led the way, tapping on a wrist-mounted holographic rig, muttering about pressure variances. "We are under the perimeter," Sarah whispered, "directly below the foundation of the Gen Core spire." They stopped at a circular maintenance hatch. It was sealed with a biometric lock and a magnetic bolt. Sarah plugged a cable from her rig into the panel. "Just give me 3 seconds. And... got it." The hatch hissed open. They climbed up into the service corridors of the tower. The transition was jarring. They went from the organic, chaotic dark of the sewers to the blinding, sterile white of Gen Core. The walls were smooth white polymer. The lights were harsh strips of blue LEDs. "Stay close," Lyra whispered. She closed her eyes, concentrating. Cade watched as the air around her shimmered. She was manipulating the ambient temperature, creating a heat haze that would scramble the thermal sensors in the hallway. They moved like ghosts. Cade took point, his pistol drawn, moving with the fluid grace of a veteran operator. He checked corners, signaled halts, and identified camera blind spots. Lyra covered the rear, her senses extended. She could smell the pheromones of the guards, hear the hum of the elevators floors away. They reached the 30th floor without firing a shot. Then, the luck ran out. They were in a wide atrium trying to cross to the express lift when a security door slid open. Two guards in heavy riot gear stepped out. "Freeze!" one shouted, raising a pulse rifle. Cade didn't freeze. He dropped to one knee, firing two suppression shots that sparked off the guard's chest plate. Lyra moved. She sprinted across the open ground, shifting mid-stride, her arm elongated, covered in bronze scales, and she backhanded the second guard with enough force to send him flying into a glass partition. Sarah scrambled to the elevator panel. "I am locking out the alarm," she hissed, typing furiously, "or trying to. Their ice is thick." More guards poured in from the side corridors. Automatic fire chewed up the sleek white walls. Cade grabbed Luna's carrier, shielding her with his body as he returned fire. He was precise, aiming for the unarmored joints of the troopers. "We are pinned," Cade yelled. Lyra roared, a sound that shook the glass. She inhaled deeply, her chest glowing bright orange. She exhaled a stream of fire that created a wall of flame between them and the guards. "Into the lift," she screamed. They dived into the elevator car. Sarah slapped the override button. The doors slid shut just as the fire suppression system kicked in, flooding the atrium with foam. That was subtle. Sarah wheezed, leaning against the wall. "I panicked," Lyra admitted, shaking soot from her hair. The elevator shot upward, 40, 50, 80. At the 99th floor, the lift slowed. "Get ready," Cade said, reloading his pistol. "This is the top." The doors opened, but it wasn't a squad of guards waiting for them. It was an army of Draken. Cade raised his weapon, his heart sinking. The corridor leading to the data core was lined with Draken warriors in full ceremonial armor, and standing in the center, holding a massive flame staff, was Veros. Lyra stepped out of the lift, her hands raised. "Father," she said, her voice steady. "You are persistent, daughter." Veros rumbled. He looked tired. The lines on his face seemed deeper than they had in the Enclave. "Are you here to stop us?" Lyra asked. "Are you here to kill me for the deal?" Veros looked at Cade. He looked at Luna, who was awake and watching him with those strange, intelligent eyes. "I walked the perimeter of the Citadel tonight," Veros said quietly. "I looked at the young ones, the hatchlings, and I thought about your words." He stepped forward. The warriors behind him did not raise their weapons. "I am an old man, Lyra. I have done terrible things for our survival. I have traded lives for land. I have sacrificed pride for peace. But there is a line." He looked at the heavy blast doors behind him, the doors to the data core. "Maris is inside," Veros said. "He showed me the pods. He showed me what he intends to do with them. He spat on the pristine white floor. He wants to breed them like cattle, strip their minds, turn them into biological drones. He called it the future of warfare." Veros looked at Cade. "You were right, human. There is no peace with monsters." "So?" Cade asked, his grip on his gun not loosening. "So," Veros said, hefting his staff, "I decided that if my legacy is to be death, let it be the death of my enemies, not my children." He turned to his warriors. "Open the path!" The Draken warriors slammed their spears against the floor and stepped aside, forming a corridor of honor. Veros looked at Lyra. A faint, grim smile touched his lips. "You have your mother's fire," he said. "Go. Burn it down. Together. The strange alliance, the veteran, the dragon woman, the hacker, and the elder. March to the blast doors." Veros placed his hand on the panel. It recognized his biosignature. The doors hissed open. They entered the data core. It was a circular room, dominated by a massive column of blue light in the center, the server stack. But arranged around the room, like exhibits in a museum, were clear cylindrical pods. Inside the pods were children. Some were infants, some were toddlers. All of them floated in suspension fluid, hooked up to tubes and wires. They had scales on their skin, ridges on their brows, hybrids. And standing on an elevated platform overlooking the horror was Director Maris. He was flanked by 4 massive cybernetically enhanced guards and 2 auto turrets. "Welcome," Maris said, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. He didn't look afraid. He looked annoyed, like a CEO whose meeting had been interrupted. "I see the family reunion is complete. Let them go." "Maris," Cade called out, his voice echoing, "it is over." "Over?" Maris laughed. He gestured to the pods. "This is just the beginning. Look at them. Mr. Walker, the Dragon Integration Program. Phase 2. He pointed to a pod containing a boy of about 4 years old. His skin was gray, his muscles unnaturally developed. "We stripped the empathy," Maris explained casually. "We enhanced the aggression. We graft the loyalty directly into the frontal cortex. They will be the perfect soldiers, stronger than humans, more obedient than dragons. And your daughter?" He looked at Luna. "She is the key, the stabilizing agent. Her genetic sequence solves the degradation issue. She will be the commander of the new legion." "Over my dead body," Lyra snarled. Maris sighed. "That can be arranged." He snapped his fingers. The turret spun up. "Cover!" Cade yelled. He dove behind a console bank, shielding Luna. The room exploded in noise. Sarah sprinted for the main interface terminal. "I need cover fire. I have to hardline into the stack to broadcast the data." "I am on it," Lyra shouted. She didn't hold back this time. She let the change take her. Her body expanded, her clothes shredding as bronze scales covered her torso and arms. Wings of pure heat energy flared from her back. She roared, a sound that shattered the glass of the empty pods nearby. She launched herself at the cyber guards. She was a whirlwind of claws and fire, moving faster than the eye could track. Cade popped up, firing with surgical precision. He took out the sensor eye of the left turret, blinding it. He switched targets, putting 2 rounds into the knee joint of a guard rushing Sarah. Varos joined the fray. He didn't run. He walked. He raised his staff, and a beam of concentrated plasma erupted from the crystal tip, incinerating the second turret instantly. "Ancient tech," Varos bellowed, laughing amidst the chaos. "Still works." Sarah's fingers flew across the holographic keyboard. Come on. Breaking encryption, bypassing the firewall. Maris stood on the platform, watching his guards fall. He didn't look panicked. He looked at his watch. "You are too late," he said calmly. Sarah hit the final key. "Upload complete," she screamed, broadcasting on all frequencies, throughout the megacity, on every billboard, every datapad, every public terminal. The feed cut out. The advertisements for nutrient paste and GenCore implants vanished. In their place, raw footage played. Footage of the labs. Footage of the forced surgeries. Documents showing the names of the council members who signed off on the child trafficking. Footage of Maris laughing about the expendable assets. In the streets, silence fell. Then, a roar began. It started in the slums of Sector 12 and rose like a tidal wave to the upper levels. Inside the tower, Maris checked a monitor. He saw the riot starting. He saw his career ending. "If I cannot have them," he said, his voice cold and flat, "no one will." He pressed a red button on his command console. "Alert!" The building AI announced. "Containment breach. Sterilization protocol initiated. Nanite release in T-minus 60 seconds. Lockdown in effect." Vents in the ceiling opened. A black, shimmering mist began to pour out. "Nanites!" Sarah screamed. "They will eat anything organic. We have to go. The blast doors began to close. Maris turned and ran for a private emergency exit at the back of the platform. Cade looked at the closing doors. He looked at the black mist descending. He looked at the pods with the children. We have to get them out, Cade yelled. Varos and his warriors began smashing the pods, pulling the wet, gasping children out. Get to the door, Lyra shouted, grabbing two infants. They sprinted for the exit. The heavy steel doors were sliding shut, the gap narrowing. 3 feet, 2 feet. Sarah slid through. Varos shoved a toddler through, then squeezed through himself. Cade was the last. He was carrying Luna and holding the hand of a hybrid boy they had pulled from a tank. He ran, but the nanite cloud was dropping fast. It blocked his path. He had to divert around a console bank. The delay cost him. The door slammed shut. Cade! Lyra screamed from the other side. Cade skidded to a halt. He was trapped. The black mist was 10 feet above him, descending like a shroud. He could hear the buzzing of millions of microscopic machines. He looked at the door. It was sealed. Go! Cade shouted through the steel. Get Luna out of here, on the other side of the door. Lyra stood frozen. She heard his voice. She knew the math. The nanites would strip the flesh from his bones in seconds. She looked at Sarah. She looked at Varos. Open it, she screamed. It is a hard seal, Sarah cried, hacking at the panel. I can't override it fast enough. Lyra looked at the door. She looked at Luna, who was wailing in Varos's arms. She had a choice, run and live, or stay and die. She chose. She didn't run. She stepped up to the blast door. She placed her hands on the cold metal. She closed her eyes and reached deep inside herself, past the fear, past the biology, to the core of the dragon fire that burned in her blood. She pushed. Heat, white-hot and blinding, erupted from her palms. The metal of the door began to glow cherry red, then orange, then white. Lyra screamed, pouring every ounce of her life force into the fire. Her skin blistered, her energy reserves drained. The metal buckled. It melted. Inside, Cade coughed, backing away as the door turned into a glowing slurry of molten slag. Through the hole, a hand reached out, a hand covered in scorched scales. Take my hand, Lyra roared. Cade grabbed the hybrid boy and jumped over the pool of molten metal. He grabbed Lyra's hand. She hauled them through, her strength failing, collapsing into his arms as soon as they were clear. Run! Varos bellowed. They sprinted down the corridor as the nanite cloud consumed the data core behind them, eating the metal, the glass, and the memory of the horrors inside. They fought their way down the emergency stairs. The tower was shaking now. Explosions rocked the lower levels as resistance fighters, inspired by the broadcast, breached the lobby. They burst out of a service exit into the cool night air. The city was burning. But it wasn't the fire of destruction. It was the fire of revolution. Cade fell to his knees on the pavement, gasping for air, clutching Luna and the rescued boy. Lyra collapsed beside him. Her hands burned, her face pale, but alive. They watched as the lights in the Gen Core tower flickered and died, the symbol of their oppression going dark against the smoke-streaked stars. We did it, Sarah whispered, sounding stunned. We actually did it. Cade looked at Lyra. She was breathing shallowly, her eyes closed. He reached out and took her hand. We are still here, he said. Lyra opened her eyes. She squeezed his hand weakly. We are still here. She agreed. And as the sirens wailed and the people of the city marched toward a new dawn, Cade knew that the hardest part of the war was over. Now, the hard part of living could begin. The smoke from the Gen Core tower did not clear for 3 days. It hung over Sector 1 like a dark, ragged flag. a smudge of carbon and melted polymer that marred the pristine artificial sky of the dome. But down in the streets, the atmosphere was not one of mourning. It was electric. It was the volatile, crackling energy of a city that had suddenly woken up to find its chains were made of glass, and that the glass was broken. Cade stood on the balcony of a makeshift triage center in Sector 12, looking out at the neon canyon of the lower levels. The giant holographic billboards that usually ran 24-hour loops of state propaganda and cosmetic ads were glitching. The feed from Sarah's data dump was still cycling through the sub-networks, impossible to scrub completely. Every few minutes, the smiling face of a news anchor would distort, replaced by the shaky, raw footage of the labs, the containment pods, and the documents signed by Director Maris. The streets below were a river of people. For the first time in Cade's memory, the crowds were not segregated. He saw human dock workers in gray jumpsuits marching alongside Draken laborers who had emerged from the shadows of the industrial district. They carried banners painted on bedsheets and scrap metal. Children are not assets. Blood is red. Blood is blue. We are coming for you. Break the dome. It was chaos, but it was a chaos that breathed. Behind him, the triage center, a converted warehouse that Lyra had secured, buzzed with a different kind of activity. It was the sound of 50 displaced children crying, playing, eating, and living. Cade turned back inside. He looked tired. The dark circles under his eyes were bruises of exhaustion, and his shoulder ached where the nanite shield had nearly failed. But he moved with a lightness that had not been there before. He wasn't patrolling a perimeter anymore. He was guarding a nursery. In the center of the room, Lyra was holding court. She sat on a crate of medical supplies, looking less like a covert operative and more like a weary queen. Her trench coat was gone, replaced by a simple tunic. Her arms bandaged where the heat of the blast door had singed her skin. She was laughing. It was a sound Cade was still getting used to, a rich, throaty melody that made the scales on her temples shimmer. She was bouncing a hybrid toddler on her knee, a little girl with green skin and terrified eyes who had slowly, over the last 48 hours, begun to smile. Luna was there too, crawling across the floor with the determined speed of an infant who had just discovered mobility. She made a beeline for Lyra, pulling herself up on Lyra's boot. Lyra reached down, her claw-tipped fingers gentle, and scooped Luna up, settling her next to the hybrid child. "See?" Lyra said to the toddler, her voice soft. "She is just like you. Different parts, same heart." Cade watched them, a lump forming in his throat. This was the victory. Not the burning tower, not the screaming crowds. This, the political fallout, however, was far from warm and fuzzy. The Central Governance Council, realizing the dam had broken, did what politicians always did. They found a scapegoat. By noon on the fourth day, every official channel was broadcasting the same message. Director Maris was a rogue agent, a radical, a traitor to the values of the state. An arrest warrant was issued, though everyone knew Maris had vanished into the off-world transit network long before the ink was dry. It was a frantic attempt to cauterize the wound, but the infection of truth had gone too deep. The documents Sarah released didn't just implicate Maris. They implicated half the council. They implicated the supply chain managers, the police chiefs, and the Draken elders who had sold their kin for territory. That reckoning came to a head deep underground, in the obsidian hall of the Enclave. Cade stood at the back of the chamber, his arms crossed, watching history pivot. The hall was packed. Every Draken in the city seemed to be there, from the warriors in bone armor to the tech scavengers in rags. The air smelled of ozone and agitation. Vero stood on the dais. He looked older than he had in the tower. The fire staff was gone, replaced by a simple walking stick. He looked out at the sea of vertical slit eyes, eyes that no longer held fear or blind reverence. They held judgment. A young Draken female, barely out of her hatchling years, stepped forward. She wore a jacket covered in protest buttons. "You sold us," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the cavern, it sounded like a thunderclap. "You traded our future for a district permit." "I traded for survival," Veros rasped. His voice lacked its usual boom. "I made the hard choices so you could live to judge me." "Survival is not enough," a warrior shouted from the back. "We want to live. We want to be part of the world, not hidden beneath it." The crowd roared in agreement. The sound was terrifying, a collective growl of a predator species pushed too far. Lyra stepped out from the shadows near the throne. The room went silent. She was the dragon woman now, the hero of the tower, the one who had walked through fire. "Father," she said. Veros looked at her. There was no anger left in him, only a vast, weary resignation. "They are right," Lyra said gently. "The old ways are dead. The isolation, the secrets, the deals in the dark. It ended when we broke those pods." Veros looked at the crowd. He looked at Cade, standing silently in the back. Then he looked at the ceiling, where the stone dragons coiled in eternal slumber. "I am a relic," Veros said. "I was forged in a war that taught me everyone was an enemy. I cannot unlearn that lesson." He reached up and unclasped the heavy mantle of the elder. It fell to the floor with a heavy thud. "But you," he said, looking at the youth in the front row, "you can learn new things. You can learn that the enemy can be a neighbor, that a soldier can be a savior." He stepped down from the dais. "I resign," Veros announced. "There will be no more Soul Elder, no more king in the mountain." He gestured to Lyra. "I propose a council, elected, and not just Draken. If we are to live with them, we must govern with them. A mixed council. For the children." He walked past Lyra. He didn't stop, but he paused for a fraction of a second, his hand brushing her arm. "Lead them better than I did," he whispered. Then he walked out of the hall, disappearing into the shadows of the deep tunnels. The transition was messy, loud, and chaotic, but it held. A temporary truce was signed. The city granted the Enclave sanctuary status, a legal term that meant the drones stopped hunting them, and the black market clinics could operate openly. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a ceasefire. Life in the weeks that followed settled into a bizarre new normal for Cade. He wasn't fighting in tunnels anymore. He was fighting a logistical war on the floor of the warehouse turned orphanage. "Cade!" Sarah yelled from across the room. "We have a code brown in Sector 4. Cade looked up from the datapad where he was trying to organize food deliveries. Sector 4 was the playpen. On it. He sighed. He walked over to where a 6-month-old hybrid baby was screaming. Cade scooped the kid up with the practiced ease of a man who had dismantled explosives in the dark. He laid the baby on the changing table. "Okay, soldier," Cade muttered. "Let's assess the damage." He fumbled with the tabs of the diaper. His hands, large and scarred, felt clumsy against the delicate, scaled skin of the infant. The baby kicked, knocking the powder container onto the floor. Cade swore softly. "Negative. Negative. Hold position." A laugh drifted over his shoulder. "You are treating it like a bomb disposal," Lyra said, leaning against the doorframe. She was holding 2 bottles of formula, the real stuff, now produced openly in a factory in Sector 8. "It is more dangerous than a bomb." Cade grumbled. finally securing the fresh diaper. A bomb doesn't wiggle. Lyra walked over and handed him a bottle. She watched him feed the baby, her eyes soft and shining. "You are good at this," she said. "I am improvising," Cade said. "That is what parenting is." Lyra replied, "Improvising with love." Later that afternoon, the older kids, a mix of street orphans and rescued hybrids, dragged Cade into the courtyard. They wanted to learn how to fight. Cade hesitated. He looked at their eager faces, seeing the ridges on their brows and the sparks of energy in their hands. He didn't want to teach them to be soldiers. He had spent his life trying to stop being one. "Teach us defense," a boy named Jackson shouted. "Teach us how to stop the drones." Cade looked at Lyra. She nodded. "Okay," Cade said, stepping into the center of the mat. "Not fighting? Protection. There is a difference." He spent the next hour showing them balance, leverage, how to use an opponent's momentum against them. He sparred with a teenage Draken girl who was faster than him but reckless. He caught her wrist, spinning her around gently. "Control," Cade told her. "Power without control is just a fire. It burns everything, including you." The girl nodded, breathless. "Like the tower?" "No," Cade said, his eyes darkening slightly. "Like the war." That night, after the chaos had settled and the children were asleep, Cade sat on the roof of the warehouse. The air was cool. The smog was thinner than usual, allowing a few actual stars to peek through the haze of the dome. He heard the door open. Lyra sat down beside him. She handed him a mug of tea that smelled of cinnamon and something stronger. "You went quiet today," she said. During the training, Cade took a sip. The liquid burned pleasantly on the way down. "I looked at those kids, Lyra, and I saw the village." He didn't need to specify which village. The memory of Sector 8 was a ghost that sat between them, a third person in every conversation. "I saw the faces I didn't save," Cade continued. "I saw the fire I dropped." Lyra didn't flinch. She had stopped flinching weeks ago, and she looked out at the city lights. "You can't erase it." "Cade," she said, "you can't scrub the ledger clean. That is not how this works." "Then how does it work?" Cade asked, turning to her. "How do you look at me and not see the man who killed your family?" Lyra turned too. Her eyes were intense, swirling with gold and amber. "Because I look at you and I see the man who saved my daughter," she said. "I see the man who jumped over a pool of molten steel for a child that wasn't his." She reached out and took his hand, her scales rough against his skin. "Absolution is a myth, Cade. We don't get to be innocent again, but we get to be useful. We get to decide that the next bomb doesn't drop, that the next fire warms a house instead of burning it down." She squeezed his hand. "You are building the future, Cade. Do not let the past tear it down." Cade looked at her. He felt the truth of her words settling into his bones, replacing the hollow ache of guilt with something solid. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, it was purpose. "I can do that," he whispered. Lyra became the face of the movement. It wasn't something she asked for, but she was a natural. She was beautiful, terrifying, and articulate. She started appearing on the evening feeds, not as a fugitive, but as a commentator. She sat across from human pundits who tried to bait her with questions about predatory instincts and biological incompatibility. Lyra would just smile, flashing a hint of fang, and lean into the microphone. "You ask if we are dangerous," she said during one interview, her image projected on screens across the city. "Of course we are. We breathe fire. But look at your history, created by humans without a single scale. You invented the atom bomb. You built the dome that chokes us. Danger is not about biology. It is about choice. She insisted on humor. She refused to be the tragic victim. When a pundit asked if interspecies relationships were unnatural, Lyra laughed. Unnatural? She quipped. Have you seen the nutrient paste you people eat? That is unnatural. Loving someone who has your back? That is the most natural thing in the universe. Besides, she added with a wink, the heating bills are much lower when your partner is a thermal generator. Cade watched her from the wings of the studio, holding Luna. He saw the way the camera loved her, the way she used her charisma to disarm the fear. She was fighting a war, but she was doing it with words and laughter, and she was winning. 6 months after the tower fell, Cade asked Lyra to meet him on the terrace of the Two Worlds. It was a newly constructed observation deck that straddled the boundary between the lower city and the entrance to the enclave. To the left, you could see the neon sprawl of the human sectors. To the right, the dripping, bioluminescent beauty of the crystal caverns. It was twilight. The fire orbs of the enclave were drifting up to meet the artificial sunset of the dome. Lyra arrived wearing a dress of deep crimson silk that shimmered like liquid magma. She looked radiant. You summoned me. Sergeant? She teased, leaning against the railing. This feels formal. Should I have brought a lawyer? Cade stood there, feeling like a teenager on a first date. He was wearing his best shirt, which was still a flannel but a clean one. No lawyers, he said. I wanted to give you something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It wasn't a diamond. It was a ring, rough and hand-forged. The band was made from the dull, gray metal of his old military dog tags, the steel that had identified him as property of the state, but set into the metal, glowing with a soft inner light, was a shard of raw dragon crystal. Lyra stopped smiling. She stared at the ring. Cade, she breathed. I made it, Cade said, his voice rushing a little. I melted down the tags. I wanted to break the old identity. And the crystal, I found it in the rubble of the tower. He took a step closer. It is us. Lyra. The steel and the stone, the war and the magic. He held it out to her. I know this is a human ritual, he said, feeling awkward. And I know we don't do things by the book. But I wanted you to know that I am not going anywhere. I am anchored here. With you? Lyra looked at the ring, then up at his face. Her eyes were shining with tears that she refused to let fall. You are ridiculous, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You melted your tags? Those were your service record. They were my past, Cade said. You are my future. Lyra let out a shaky laugh. She reached out and took the ring. She didn't put it on immediately. She held it up to the light of the fire orbs. It is beautiful, she whispered, and it is flawed, just like us, Cade said. Lyra looked at him, her gaze fierce and steady. This isn't just a promise, Cade. This is a contract. If you put this on me, you are stuck with the fire. You are stuck with the politics. You are stuck with a woman who will argue with you until the sun burns out. I am counting on it, Cade said. Lyra smiled. She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She grabbed him by the lapels and pulled him down. The kiss was slow. It wasn't the frantic, desperate collision of the tunnel, nor the grief-stricken purge of the safe house. It was deep. It was steady. It was the kiss of two people who had seen the worst of each other and decided to stay. It tasted of peace. When they pulled apart, Cade rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said. I know, Lyra replied, tracing the line of his jaw. I love you too, soldier. They stood there for a long time, watching the city below. "What do we tell Luna?" Cade asked eventually. "When she gets older? About where she came from? About the labs?" Lyra looked out at the lights. "We tell her the truth," she said. "We tell her that some people wanted her to be a weapon, and some people wanted her to be a symbol." She turned to Cade. "But we teach her that her power is hers, not the regime's, not the elders, not ours. She doesn't have to be a commander or a savior. She just has to be Luna." Cade nodded. "That sounds like a plan." The montage of the changing world played out on the city's screens. Cut 2. A debate in the High Council chamber. A human representative and a Draken elder are arguing over zoning laws, but there are no weapons on the table, only data pads. Cut 2. A protest in Sector 7. A group of human teenagers are painting a mural on the side of a building. It depicts a dragon and a soldier breaking a cage. The paint is bright, chaotic, and hopeful. Cut 2. The courtyard of the orphanage. It is a sunny day, simulated. Hybrid children are playing tag with human kids from the neighborhood. Scales glint alongside skin. Laughter overlaps with the sirens of the city, creating a new kind of music. Cut 2. Apartment 7D. The hallway was quiet. The flickering neon light had been replaced by a steady, warm LED. The graffiti on the walls had been scrubbed away, replaced by murals of vines and stars. Cade stood in the doorway, but it wasn't the old doorway. The wall between 7C and 7D was gone. It had been knocked down, the jagged edges smoothed and plastered over, creating a single, large living space. Cade held a bottle in his hand. It was a sleek glass bottle filled with shimmering blue liquid. The label read, Nutrisynth Type 9, Dragonline Supplement, Open Market Approved. He walked into the apartment. It was cluttered and warm. There were toys on the floor, a mix of plastic blocks and carved wooden dragons. There was a kinetic pistol on the shelf, but it was dusty, pushed behind a stack of storybooks. Lyra was standing by the window, looking out at the city. She was rocking Luna, who was drowsy, her head resting on Lyra's shoulder. Cade stopped, leaning against the frame of the archway that connected their old lives. "Delivery," he said softly. Lyra turned. She smiled, and the room seemed to get brighter. "Just in time," she said. She was getting fussy. Cade walked over and handed her the bottle. He watched as she fed Luna, the baby's eyes drooping, the vertical pupils relaxing into round pools of dark ink. Cade looked at them, his wife, his daughter. He felt the weight of the ring on Lyra's finger, the weight of the peace in the room. "You know," he said, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth, "I am still just a lone veteran trying to find milk for his baby." Lyra looked up. She smirked, that familiar, dangerous, beautiful expression that had started it all. She walked over to him, shifting Luna to one arm so she could wrap the other around Cade's neck. She pulled him down for a slow, affectionate kiss. "No," she whispered against his lips. "You are a veteran. And you found the milk." She pulled back, her amber eyes glowing with warmth. "But you will never be alone again." Cade smiled. He wrapped his arms around both of them, pulling them close. The door to the apartment slid shut with a soft hiss, sealing them in. Inside, the lights were warm. The baby was sleeping, and the future, imperfect, messy, and fiercely loved, was just beginning.